Welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast, and on today's episode... Welcome back, everyone, to the Region Free Gamers podcast, the podcast that is fluent in gaming, where we chat about games, old and new, talk to gamers all over the world, and sometimes go on unhinged rants about this medium that we love dearly. My name is Ozzy, and I will be your host for today's episode. And before we get started, I want to give a big thank you to everyone that has listened to us so far, particularly those good people in the Instagram community who support us with each episode release. And if you like what we're doing, then please make sure to go for a surgical strike on that subscribe button. And particularly important, leave us a review, since that is the best way to get feedback on how we're doing, whether we suck or whether we're okay. Just let us know one way or the other. And hey, we want to keep doing this, so get the word out about what we're doing, and maybe other people will listen. So, with that out of the way, why don't we introduce my fellow co-hosts? Over on the east, we have the Dragon of Helsinki, Masa.
Hi, my name is Masa, and unfortunately today I'm not going to be able to talk about Yakuza.
I'm pretty sure you'll fit that in, buddy.
But that was all day, like today I've been, trying to think of a way to name some Yakuza during this episode, but that's like the only thing that I could come up with. So
Isn't there an Xbox game called like Yakuza Death Missions or something?
The Yakuza missions,
Yes.
Reckless. the
Yeah,
Yakuza
that's
missions.
also on the PS2.
Yep. And if you heard those sweet dulcet tones, that's over on the west. We have the Orange Star CEO of Puerto Rico, Arnie.
I actually got a tattoo of like Halo 2's logo, and then I realized that this is audio only.
It's gonna be messed up on everyone.
I was very excited.
Yeah, unfortunately. And even further out west, we have a very special guest today. So guys, his given name is Rick, but you might know him better as the man, the legend, the wise old man of the Retro Collective community, Ashevent. What's up, Rick?
Hey, not much. Glad to be here. I'm trying to figure out exactly why you guys wanted me. I figure it comes down to one. Comes down to one of two things: either because you're trying to reach out to that lucrative
Demographic.
senior citizen demographic, yeah, or you guys
We're trying to go for the AARP demographic, so we're trying to get up a collab with them. So
I figured
we figured over 40.
And we wanted you that both me and Paul would actually feel young for once. Yeah, too bad Paul is not here, but at least I'm feeling younger than ever.
Oh yeah, and that's what I was gonna say too, because I thought it was funny that Paul was missing, and suddenly I got an invite. Yeah,
I will say, and this is not just because we finally got you on the show, but this is like, I think one of the first episodes we ever talked about making when we started the podcast, and you were always on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was you, it was a Strictly episode and a few others, but certainly you were right up there once we started, because, we're really honored to have you on. I mean, you're filling the designated old guy spot for today, so I'm sure we're going to benefit from your years of wisdom.
well, either that or listen to a shit ton of old man stories. One of the two.
Listen, what are we here for if not for
Yeah, I
that?
don't think we even need Paul anymore.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
this is the
just
perfect
permanently
replacement.
replace him because we get the old man stories and he's also Paul, so yeah.
The reason why we have Rick here today is because we're talking about one of his favorite subjects. And yes, everyone, we're going to talk about Microsoft's Black Box of Doom. And that is the original Xbox. And no, not the Xbox One. That will get us due on our 10-year anniversary. We can all complain about the stupidity of that name. But today, it's all about Microsoft's first foray into the console arena, where it challenged Sony and Nintendo to do just a little bit better. But before we get into that, why don't we learn a little bit more about Rick? So, Rick, first of all, how do you get your name, Ashevent?
I guarantee none of you are going to know this, but a long time ago, there was a comic book called Ash Comics, and it was actually Joe Quesada, the guy who's the editor in chief of Marvel right now.
Yeah.
It was his comic book brand, and so Ash was a firefighter superhero, and as you guys know, I'm a firefighter, and I have been for 30 years. So It was actually my first comic book, and it was from Event Comics. So you put them together, there you go.
Oh, interesting.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, Rick, you're guaranteed to be the coolest guy we've had on the show because you're a firefighter, and you were a military firefighter, if I understand correctly, right?
Yeah, I did 20 years, and then I just flipped, and I'm doing. I did 10 years as a DoD firefighter after that.
So Rick is basically our designated bouncer from now on. So that's the reason why we have it. We just need to up the testosterone a little bit. Rick, how long have you been gaming, man?
Oh, Jesus. I would say if you want to count arcades and all that kind of stuff, ever since Pong hit in about 72, 73.
Wow.
So basically, you've seen the entire trajectory of gaming in a nutshell, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, like I said, I started before they even had arcades, and we were playing Pong and stuff in like skating rinks, that kind of thing, bowling alleys, and then of course the Atari hit. But before that, my first console, and I'm throwing this out there, is the very powerful Fairchild Channel F.
Yeah, I mean, I did not know about this console until I followed your account, and was it kind of like an Atari clone console? Because I really am interested about this console, and maybe at some point in the future we should do an episode on this. But what was kind of the environment in which the Fairchild Channel F came to be?
So just real quick, it actually came out a year before the Atari 2600. So
oh snap!
Yeah. So let's
get your
not get
facts
into
straight.
that. Let's not get into that clone shit. Yeah, it was. There's a bunch of other historical stuff. Yeah, I won't get into. We can check that out another time. But it was the first console to have a microprocessor and the first to have programmable ROM carts. Mm-hmm. So, and for me, it was just the first home console I ever had, and it was awesome, and I had a blast with it, and I love it today. But I'm gonna be honest. A year later, the 2600 came out and just absolutely destroyed it.
Yeah, I mean, was that jump in technological quality that big from the Atari 2600 from the Fairchild?
I mean, there was a pretty decent jump. Yeah, I mean, we're still talking stick figures and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it just blew up. I mean, they had everything. Atari had everything they needed to succeed. So
yeah. I was going to say, I think Atari also strayed away from the Fairchild's naming convention of just naming everything game, insert number here.
Yeah. I have. I'm working on a full set of
which is what, like it's like 20 some.
Yeah, it's like altogether be 27.
Yeah,
and then there's a couple of games, and somebody was telling me that actually they got the blessing from, I don't know, the one last guy alive from Fairchild that the Pac-Man homebrew is supposedly part of the real set now.
Oh wow!
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah. If you guys are a little bit lost with respect to that, the Fairchild Channel F came with carts, and each cart was numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each one of them, Rick, came with a few games, right?
Yeah, most of the carts, usually like 1 or 2, and there's a few that have 4. And then, of course, the first Fairchild came built in with 2 games. They're Pong clones, but I'll be honest, one of them is probably the greatest Pong clone of all time.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Not Atari clone, Pong clone. That's what I was thinking when I first started looking into the Fairchild. So, how old were you when Pong came out, Ash? Not Ash, Rick. Damn it.
Yeah, well, let's see. Now you're going to make me do math, and this is just all going to go down the shitter.
Now you're just like trying to expose his age.
Yeah.
But it's a very, very subtle way to see how old are you, Ash.
No,
damn it, Rick.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, and actually, I was going to tell you, you guys, a lot of people call me Ash, too, so that's fine. I was born in 65, so 72 is when Pong came out, so we got to do a little quick math there.
Yeah, so you kind of maybe not had a full perspective of it, but you kind of must have known about it, correct?
What's Pong, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, I was old enough to throw a quarter in. It wasn't, I'll be honest, Pong didn't like hit and we all flipped out and we didn't all stand around it, in awe.
Yeah.
It was just something else. We'd kind of goof around with it a little bit, but everybody went back to the pinball machines. It was more like when Space Invaders came out, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. By the way, how was it like? Because in Soviet Finland, the first literally like had
Game
no
play
video
as
games
you.
before the NES. So I'm like, and I mean, of course, NES, was a big deal because they did promote that thing like quite a bit in Finland, like on TV and in magazines and so on. So that's why I'm really curious, like, how did you find out about Pong and like how big of a deal was it in the US?
Oh, it just showed up in the skating rinks and bowling alleys. I mean, it wasn't like we heard about it or anything. It was just one day here was this big machine that was just sitting there.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty awesome, man. I mean, so Space Invaders was kind of like the first one where you were like, oh man, this is pretty awesome, right?
Yeah. Space Invaders got into, and then I'd say I think it was the second generation after that was like when Pac-Man came. That was huge. Pac-Man was a monster. That was the one where everybody was throwing their quarters on it and waiting for a turn and that kind of thing. And then of course arcade started sprouting up.
Yeah,
awesome.
This is what I've always been curious about, and I've asked this question of other guests, but just for perspective, I was born 91, so my first console is Super Nintendo. So my perspective on like the jump from console to console is so much more limited in scope than yours. And so I'm always curious of like, was there a moment, like, I get that like seeing the transition from Pong to Fairchild and from Fairchild to like Atari must have been, pretty impressive. But like when you started seeing like Atari to NES or, even like NES to Super Nintendo or Neo Geo, like what was that like for you? Like seeing it go, because you've seen the entire spectrum.
Oh yeah, because I've been a gamer throughout. The lower stuff I don't think it jumped that much, that we weren't like blown away by the Atari and stuff compared to the Fairchild and that kind of stuff. Although nobody knew what a Fairchild was but me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean for sure the NES came out and that was really refreshing. It was nice. But when we jumped to the Super Nintendo, that was the one. Mode 7, holy shit.
Yeah, like that was the one that blew the mind.
Yeah, I mean playing Contra and the aircraft comes at you. Yeah, that was the badass one. For me, that was one of the biggest jumps. And then you mentioned the Neo Geo. Couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
A lot of my stories are, but I could only afford one console.
Exactly.
But dude, we would go to this place called Incredible Universe and just drool over that console. They had Samurai Showdown playing, which is this is my second favorite fighting game series, and we couldn't, none of us could afford it, and they wouldn't even let you touch it. It wasn't like, hey, we're gonna let you play, like some displays. It was just like behind the counter, and they just had it running Samurai Showdown on a TV,
on like the attract mode or whatever.
Yeah, they just that was it.
Well, that's the thing is like, this is what I always think of when I think of like younger gamers or even younger listeners. I'm like obviously it's crazy to see something like from the 360 to like the PS4 or like the Xbox One X back to like the original Xbox, but the transition from like these early gaming machines to even like something like 16-bit, I feel like it's just so much more like mind-blowing, because I don't think you can conceive of like when you're looking at Pong, I don't think you could ever conceive of like Street Fighter 2 being a thing.
Well, but Artie, I mean, just think about it. I mean, if you go back 20 years, 1999, what was coming out then? It was the Dreamcast was already out, so you had something like Sonic Adventure, Soul Calibur, etc. And now you have Soul Calibur 6, for example, and you have Sonic games, etc. And they look, much, much better, but in terms of graphical fidelity. But if you go back from 1999 to 1979, I mean, it's a massive technological leap. You're going from stick figures to actual fully 3D rendered models.
Yes.
That is literally from going from the Stone Age to the Iron Age, basically.
That's the thing is like, because I can draw a line from Soul Calibur 2 to Soul Calibur 6, but like, I can't draw a line from like Atari Boxing to like, let's get ready to rumble.
So it's like from year to year. I mean, and you see this with a Nintendo from the original black box games. From year to year, there were just huge leaps, even within the same ecosystem, even within the same Nintendo. So, it was just a period of huge innovation. And so when you see something like the Super Nintendo, as Rick said, it's like, okay, now you start seeing the future and what it could be, potential 3D graphics. Mm-hmm. And that's when everyone's mind starts racing. It's like, where can we go from here? And then you have shit like the Lawnmower Man and stuff. Maybe we'll have virtual reality at some point in the future. We're still waiting, but we're getting there almost.
Yeah. we don't.
Go ahead, Rick.
No, I'm sorry. We had. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this or whatever. There was actually a hologram arcade cabinet long time
I've not
ago.
heard of this.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look it up. I'm not an expert on it, but I just remember us going, "Is this the future?" And it was kind of weird. It made like a little hologram in front of you.
Let's go on a quick digression here. You guys remember on the arcades that Beachhead arcade where you put on like the headset and you could like shoot like you were like on a turret and stuff like that? Do you remember that?
Oh no.
No.
Yeah, well, it was like, I mean, it wasn't 3D or anything, but it was like it strapped onto your face.
Yeah.
And then you were able to have 360 movement and stuff like that, and you were like defending this beachhead and stuff. So you could probably still see it on like a Dave & Buster's or something like that.
Honestly,
Yeah.
to me, like when I was a kid, like having like something like, have you guys ever played that arcade game where it's like you're skiing down the mountain, but it's like there's actual skis and you stand on them and you have to like slalom and stuff? Like that was the epitome of like realism in video games for me. I was like, this is it. Like nothing will ever be better than this.
No, dude, hang on. Hang on.
Yeah.
Yu Suzuki, I bow down to you because Hang On to me was the epitome of being able to actually get into a motorcycle. I mean, now I can do so, and I won't do so because I could die.
I gotta say one thing. Like, I always get like really sad when we talk about like older arcade games because once again in Soviet Finland, we barely had any.
If you guys don't realize, that's why Mas is so quiet right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Mas is just crying there, playing a violin on his shoulder.
These motherfuckers and their fancy ass arcade machines.
But Rick, if you haven't been able to tell, we're like young millennials, just like, Grandpa,
much.
tell us a story. Tell us how it used to be back in the day.
Well, that's the thing is it's funny to me because I can imagine like when I was a kid, growing up in what is essentially already a formed games industry, just being like, I wonder what, like is virtual reality the future? Is like this and that ever going to happen? And now we have VR and we use it to play Tetris. It's like nothing changes. The time is a flat circle.
Rick, what are some of your favorite genres? You mentioned that Samurai Shodown was your second favorite fighter. I imagine Street Fighter is your first.
Yeah, for sure.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, dude. I live that shit.
And you're a big fan of Dan Hibiki?
Oh, yeah. I actually got my first Dan Hibiki shirt yesterday. There's a place called On It that made a shirt, and it was overpriced, and I should have never bought it, but I had to have it.
Yeah. I remember I think your profile picture in Instagram for a while was Dan in Pocket Fighter. I think was like the profile, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I love Dan. It's hard to get his stuff, but I mean.
So, what are some of your favorite genres, man?
So, fighting games are my number one. Head and shoulders above everything else. Yeah, I mean, that whole era of the first fighting game, explosion. Yeah, I bought into that hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. What was your first fighting game ever?
That was what I was going to ask, Mas. Good for pointing that out.
It's hard to break down what you think's a fighting game. I mean, really, I did play Street Fighter 1, but it sucked. But I mean, Street Fighter 2 that was the one that started it all for me, anyhow.
Yeah.
And then again, Samurai Shodown after that is just amazing. And I like Tekken. I like a lot of the 3D fighters that came along later on. But I really like this push of going back to kind of like a 2.5D. As far as those type games, and I'm super excited for the new Samurai Shodown this year. I mean, I can't even explain how excited.
Oh, dude, there's gonna be a new one.
Oh yeah. It looks amazing. It's they've already said it's gonna be rated M, and
it has to, right? I mean, come on. I mean, a big part of that game was just the blood gushing everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, they're showing in the trailer like you do a stab, and I know it's the kind of like the more cinematic stuff. It's not actually in game, although there is some in game footage. But, I mean, I think we're going to see blood actually splash on people, so, Yeah.
So is it going to be 2D or 3D?
It's kind of like a 2.5, so kind of like how Street Fighter... Okay. It's got a little bit of a Street Fighter 4 look to it because of the, brush strokes. But that's actually from the original artwork if you look at it.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, were you more of a Capcom guy or an SNK guy?
Ooh, God, you're gonna. Ooh, man. Yeah, that's.
I'm gonna split your loyalties here.
You're making him choose like between his children. Like,
yeah. Oh, that's easy. No, that's the children part's easy. It's the fighting. Man, that's tough. God dang. I'm gonna be honest, man. That's rough. I mean, I might have to give the edge to Capcom just because they kept it together longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, SNK came out with, it's just now that I am realizing how many games SNK really released. I mean, they released so many different fighters, and they had so many different styles. I mean, The Last Blade was so different from everything else that was coming out at the time, and it was a 2D weapons-based fighter.
Yeah.
So it's really mind-boggling to see. I mean, but even Capcom had like things like Red Earth and stuff like that, which we had not knowledge about, but they were still coming out with really weird stuff.
Capcom sort of defined that sort of fighting game era, I think, between like Street Fighter 2 and Darkstalkers and sort of a lot of the stuff they were doing. Just like that art style, I think, is emblematic of that time.
I mean, it's no Pit Fighter, but, it's something.
It's no Bad Dudes, but...
Rick, so let me ask you, what's your favorite game, man?
For the Xbox or just all time?
All time.
All time. Oh, jeez. Street Fighter 2, I mean, and then all the, Street Fighter, Turbo, Hyper...
Yeah.
Fighting Love, whatever, I mean, that was just that whole series is my favorite. And then after that, I got to give it to Samurai Showdown 4. That's my favorite of the series. I know a lot of Samurai Showdown guys are flipping out right now that I didn't say 2 because, that's the all to end all. Although 5's really, really good. 5 Special, I mean, is really good. But, Legend of Zelda Link to the Past, I have just, when I got that game, I played it 3 times in a row.
So let me ask you, Rick, I mean, were you able to game still while, you had kids and stuff like that, with newborns and the like? I mean, how did that transition kind of happen?
So as far as like, NES era and on, when I, had kids and stuff, I would say I was kind of lucky in a way because of my being a firefighter. So I used to work 24 on, 24 off. So when I was at work, usually after all our training's done and stuff after 4:30, we had little groups and we'd sit there and play a little bit. And then when I was at home, when my kids were younger, I didn't really play at home at all. But then when they started going to school, well, they're at school. So I'd get the house clean, get everything set up, and then, then I could game a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
What about gaming in the army?
Oh, I was in the Air Force, but that's fine. I did 20
Masa,
years.
you're getting into very, very fine territory there.
No. I worked on an army base for a year. I love those guys, so I didn't have a problem with that.
Well, Rick, I mean, you're not a Marine, so Marines are the ones that get very offended if you tell them, either Army, Air Force, or Navy. I mean, they get really offended.
Oh yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I've worked with them a couple of times in a few locations. It was kind of the same thing. I was still a firefighter. I was still doing 24 on, 24 off. So
gotcha.
Even in the military, it was the same thing. And then I know there was a discussion about maybe having another podcast about military and firefighters and stuff like that. But when I was on deployments, there were places where I could take my stuff with me. And that's
awesome, man.
Yeah, so it's funny. You got these little tiny CRT that somebody had scored somehow in a tent, and you're all hooking up. I got a picture somewhere of me playing Street Fighter, as a matter of fact, in this little little tent in the middle of the desert.
I just a little bit behind the
scenes.
That's
like the most badass thing ever.
Just behind the scenes. So actually, when we're talking about Street Fighter, we actually had a Street Fighter 2 episode, and originally we wanted Rick to be on. But our schedules just couldn't line up because we knew that Rick was just a huge Street Fighter 2 fan. So unfortunately, that didn't work out. But now we're here, and now we're talking Xbox. So let's talk a little bit about that. Rick, just since you're our guest of honor today, what is your experience with the Xbox, both back then and right now?
So I think back then, I think people will be shocked. I was not an early adopter. I did not jump on the Xbox right off the bat. Mostly just because of cost. And I had a PS2 that was chipped. One of the things about being in the military is you go to places that love modding consoles. So when I was in Korea, I got my PlayStation 2 chipped, and actually I got it while I was in Korea. And so, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was getting free games, you know,
Yeah.
and so to go out and spend $300 on an Xbox was kind of like, I don't know. But I really was excited about a U.S. console and them getting back into the market. And I was, reading a lot of good stuff. But I was on a deployment. I was actually in UAE, which is a cakewalk. Trust me. Military guys are, like, don't act like it was hard. It wasn't. UAE was awesome. So nobody was shooting at us or anything, other than, shooting sandwiches at us or something. And,
shooting pictures.
UAE it's just beautiful, man. It's gorgeous. So anyway, the little shops there, they all sell modded stuff. And I mean, I don't even know if they sell stuff that's not. And,
not modded.
So I got an Xbox. It was about a year and a half, I want to say, after the Xbox came out. And, had a whopping 120 gig hard drive in it. And it was chipped.
Oh, wow.
And so for us, man, that was awesome because now I'm not, it already had all the emulators built in and it had a lot of arcade games and stuff. So that was actually my first foray into getting back into retro gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on the Xbox and the PS2, both of them, they did a very good job, I think, better than the generations before, because this is about the time that games just kind of started growing a little bit older and people started to realize, it's worthwhile to look back upon our past. And so there were a lot of collections like the Midway Arcade Collection and stuff like that, Atari collections. So these were consoles that really started just packing in those nostalgic memories, which now it's just kind of par for the course. But at the time, that was really the only way to play retro games. So what's your experience with the console now? Do you still play the Xbox or...
Oh yeah, no, and that was kind of one of the things where, I mean, I'll be honest, I bought it mostly for all the free games and stuff like that, and the old stuff was cool, but just being able to throw a disc in there and download it and play it. But then I got a real appreciation for the unit. I mean, it's strong as hell. I mean, for one, after I got the Xbox, I never took my PlayStation 2 on a deployment because let's be honest, the fat's fragile. And
it is.
Yeah,
I don't have my original fat. Yeah, I mean, it broke down with a disk read error within like 3 years. That's something about Sony is that all of their hardware in the PlayStation arena has just been very, very bad. At least the first one. With the original PS1, it was the overheating issues. With the PS2, it was a disk read error. With the PS3, it was the yellow light of death. I don't know what the PS4 has, but I think, Rick, we were talking that a lot of people bring it in for repair and stuff like that you were hearing someone talk about that.
Yeah, there's a shop here that repairs systems, and I went and asked the guy, I said, hey, what's your number one system right now getting turned in? He's like, PS4 hands down.
But that could also be because PS4 is like leading the pack.
There's more of them.
Yeah. But Arnie, let me ask you, what's your experience with the Xbox?
I mean, for me, much like Rick, I was not an adopter of the Xbox. I was PS2 guy. I had a PS1 before this, so that was my sort of go-to. And then what happened was I would, because I was younger-ish during this time, I would go to a friend of my mom's house, and they had they had all three systems, I think. At least the Xbox and the PS2, I remember. And they had like a bunch of games, so I would just play random stuff. That was the first time I played Ring of Red. I played Mr. Mosquito for the first time. And then, eventually, I tried playing the Xbox, and I played Knights of the Old Republic. And I fell in love with that game. Like, as soon as I started playing it, I could not put it down. So after I played it like 2 or 3 times, I'm like, I need to like buy an Xbox. So I ended up trading a whole bunch of PS2 stuff back to GameStop, probably for not that much money, and my mom covered the rest of it, and I got my first original Xbox with Knights of the Old Republic, and I was set. Like, for the longest time, it was just KOTOR 1 and KOTOR 2 were like the only Xbox games I had, and then after a while I started buying a little bit more stuff.
That's awesome. Masa, what's your experience with the Xbox?
Well, okay, so I think it's well established that I'm a huge Nintendo fanboy. And
so you were looking at this very skeptically from afar and saying, it's just going to be another Atari Jaguar.
Also I have to say, like, that whole generation, Dreamcast was completely irrelevant in Finland. Like you never, like, if you never see any Dreamcast games out in the wild, like none. Mm-hmm. Even like our like local auction site, like there's barely any Dreamcast stuff. GameCube was a little bit more popular, but still like fairly irrelevant. And the same thing with the Xbox. Like it just wasn't that big in Finland. Like it was all about the PS2. So for me, of course, like I had a GameCube, and then I didn't get an Xbox like the OG one until like maybe I don't know 5 or 6 years ago. So yeah, I gotta say like I missed out on the Xbox era like back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, and that's unfortunate, but I think that, you know, a lot of the Xbox games were cross-platform, so there's something to be said about all the exclusives that you have missed out on, and I think it's really worthwhile to just go back to those and explore what you missed.
Yeah.
But I'm always kind of interested in what was the reception in Europe, because I know in the UK, the Xbox was pretty big. But I don't know about the other countries, so I think, you know, Finland, would you say was a success there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm fairly sure that in Northern Europe, like Scandinavia and Finland and so on, like Xbox really wasn't that big of a thing. Like nowadays when I go to, like, let's say I go to, you know, game stores, like the ones that, you know, actually have retro stuff, they have like, I don't know, like hundreds of PS2 games. Of course, there's always a, you know, decent GameCube section, but then there's like honestly not that much like Xbox stuff, and even the consoles, like those are kind of hard to find in Finland.
Yeah, I mean, there are a dime a dozen over here.
Yeah.
You could get them for like $40-$50. I think the big problem is that they're so heavy that people just want to get rid of them.
But then I have to say that it's actually interesting how, okay, so we are not going to talk about the 360 or Xbox One during this episode, but I do have to mention that 360 was actually like really fucking big in Finland. Like that was legit huge. And, you know, whenever I go to flea markets, all I see usually it's just like PS2 games and Xbox 360 games. And I think that at least in Finland, 360 was the most popular console of that generation, even bigger than the Wii.
Yeah, 360 did very well for Xbox. I think even more so than the Xbox One to this point. I don't know what the secret sauce was on that one, but
I think it was price. I think it was price and the fact that they released earlier than the PS3. And I think that Sony really did a lot of harm to its reputation with the way that they approached the PS3. But, you know, that's a topic for another day. So I guess I could just talk a little bit about my experience with the Xbox. By this point, I had already gotten the PS2, and my mom had bought the PS2 after many times cleaning houses and stuff like that. And so I was very happy with it. And then all of a sudden, another machine is about to come out, and I'm like, you know, I'm not going to make my mom, like, go clean houses for, like, 2 weeks just to be able to afford this piece of machine. And so when it came out in 2001, I really didn't have, you know, the ability to buy it, and I wasn't going to ask for it for Christmas. But I was very aware of it, and I was seeing EGM and all the magazines just kind of, you know, talk about how this was a very impressive console, and it had state-of-the-art technology, etc. And I would read all the interviews with Jay Allard and Ed Fries, etc. And it really piqued my interest. And the first time I played it was actually like maybe a week after launch day, and it was with the original Duke controller. So that was my first impression of it, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I played Project Gotham. And Project Gotham was pretty amazing, but it was something that I had already seen before. But then I played Halo, and before this, I had played Medal of Honor on the PS1, and that was my first experience with a first-person shooter. Mm-hmm. And I could not make heads or tails out of it because of the control scheme, and it was just very foreign to me. But something about Halo and the way that the offset joysticks were designed just clicked for me. And it felt really fun. And so it just kind of stuck with me. And I said, I kind of really like this, even though I've never liked the first-person shooter.
Yeah.
So a year later, you know, the Xbox was not doing great. So Microsoft came out with a bundle. And the bundle was with Sega GT and Jet Set Radio Future.
Yep.
And so Christmas of 2002... I finally, you know, decided after actually seeing Splinter Cell, because when I saw Splinter Cell, I was like, okay, that's it. You know, there's this guy doing the Van Damme split. I gotta buy this. So actually, I asked for Christmas, and that's when I got it. And you know, that's all she wrote. After that, I played Halo. That was the first person shooter that I played through to completion, and I would play it multiplayer with my friends.
Yep.
And Knights of the Old Republic. I mean, Knights of the Old Republic is one of the games. I think it's the most notable game that I remember just playing through the night. And then hearing the birds chirping, and just saying, "Holy shit! I have just spent the whole night playing this." It was, I think, summer of 2003, and best summer ever. So yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of memories with it, and for a long time after it was, discontinued, and I kept playing the PS2 because games were still coming out for it, and then the 360, etc. I just forgot about the Xbox, and it's only been after I got back into retro collecting that I started re-exploring the Xbox, and it's just a nifty machine, man. I mean, it's a machine that has so many bells and whistles that you're still kind of exploring today. So I have it out now, it's still there, and I pop it in every so often, and if I want a third-party game from that era, then it's going to be the Xbox. That's going to be the way to go, because it was just miles beyond what the PS2 could do. It really was a very stark difference in terms of graphical quality, etc. So, that's been my experience with the Xbox, and I have a lot of love for it. The love that I don't have for the 360 is the love that I have for the original one. I love the original Xbox, and I don't care for the One or the 360. So that says a lot.
And you were talking about grapple. You're really doing yourself a disservice if you don't have a component cable. And possibly one of the new HDMI cables for the original Xbox.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the original Xbox actually outputs in 1080i if the game supports it. So it's the PS2 wasn't even capable of doing that. The most it could do was 480i. So it's really an amazing machine, but it's unfortunate that most people play it on regular AV cables. So seriously, if you have an original Xbox, you could actually just plug it into your components. It's actually one of the easier consoles to plug in from back in the day. You don't need a CRT. It plays just as good on a big screen as it does on a small CRT. So it's a console that doesn't have a lot of fuss in terms of setting it up in the modern day.
And I know this is kind of tough nowadays, but if you happen to ever run across the Monster cables or the OEM cables, those are a big difference over like the cheap Chinese ones. I mean, don't get me wrong, the cheap Chinese ones will still give you a decent quality, but you're going to get a lot of static, but those OEM and Monster cables, and they go for about $50, when you find them. I've been lucky at thrift stores, and actually when my wife bought me my Mountain Dew Xbox, the guy said, "Oh, I got cables," and it was the Monster cables were included, so that was pretty sweet.
Yeah, those Monster cables are legendary now. I mean, that's why they're so expensive, because the quality is just so great. But I'm afraid if I get those cables, I'm gonna spend all that money, and then my dogs may chew it. So, and then I'll lose a piece of my heart. Then.
Well, the other thing is too, when you put those Monster cables in your TV, you leave them because they grab on. They're known. I mean, you'll damn near pull a port right out of your TV when they're in. They're in.
Yeah. I don't have them, but I hear that they're just absolutely fantastic. So. But yeah, I mean, the Xbox just lends itself to being, very easy to set up nowadays. So if you happen to go around a thrift store or anything and you find one, make sure to grab it, because there are a lot of good experiences there.
Yeah, and I mean, you also you have a decent chance that it might be modded also. Yeah. And there's like telltale signs that you can look at and see. But that's the other thing is Xbox modding, I feel like, was big even it was as big as it is, I think, now. I mean, obviously they can do a lot more now, but Xbox modding has been big since the system came out, I think.
Oh, absolutely, because it was so easy to mod.
Yeah, so there's a chance you could just run into like a $20 Xbox that has, a whole bunch of shit built into it.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
All right, with that said, let's take a quick break, and then we can jump into the history of the Xbox. So we'll be back in a jiffy.
All right.
Alright guys, so we are back now, and let's talk about the history of how the Xbox came to be. So we have to jump into our time machine and go back to the year 2000, Y2K. Everyone was going crazy. There was a dot-com boom. Everything was going great. That was before we lost our innocence. So at this point, Microsoft was kind of a big deal. They were perhaps the biggest company in the world. And there was an antitrust lawsuit against them. If you had a PC, it was running on Windows. Apple really was nowhere to be found then. I mean, we think of Apple right now and they're a huge player. Apple back in the day was just, computers that you saw on libraries and middle schools.
Yeah.
So,
well, that was the thing too, is like PC was sort of the word for Windows. Like it was like, oh, you have an Apple or you have a PC, and like PC is exclusively Microsoft.
Exactly, and it was only later that Apple came out with a very flashy campaign about PCs being stuffy and old-fashioned, etc. But at this point in time, Bill Gates was the man. He was the guy on everyone's lip, richest man in the world, and Microsoft was just riding high. Microsoft Office, I was listening to an interview yesterday with Seamus Blackley, who we're going to talk about a little bit more. Microsoft Office was the best-selling product of all time, literally, like not just across PCs, but everywhere. It made an insane amount of money. So, but what people don't realize is that Microsoft was a software company. Mm-hmm. Microsoft did not, for all of its ubiquitousness with PCs, at the end of the day, it did not make PCs. So for Microsoft to jump into the hardware business was something that they had to very deliberately think about because it was not in their nature. So it was around this time that the PS2 was about to be released and the Dreamcast was out. Actually, the Microsoft folks had a collaboration with Sega with respect to the Dreamcast because they were inserting Windows CE as part of the framework for the Dreamcast, but that never really went anywhere. So Microsoft was kind of dipping its toes into the console arena. I mean, of course, they did have Microsoft Games Studios, which came out with Age of Empires, etc. Mm-hmm. So they did have a games division, but they were not producing game consoles. So for Microsoft, this was kind of a very remote possibility of ever doing a console. So Rick, did you have any kind of knowledge of whether Microsoft was kind of thinking about making a console, etc. back in the day?
So, I know it's surprising. You guys probably thought I was hanging out in a cave with a club and everything back then, but we did have magazines, and we knew it was coming, and I was pretty excited about it. It was one of those things where it's like, I'll be honest, a little patriotism there. It's like, we're kind of getting back into it. I don't want to talk about I don't want to talk about the Jaguar, even though I do like that console as well. But, really, let's be honest. This was the first real chance, we kind of had of getting back. So I was excited about it. There was that worry because they were such a big company that, they were going to screw it up or it was just going to be just some kind of weird PC thing. We knew it was coming. I was pretty excited about it. But, the other thing, too, is that, and I kind of understand why Microsoft wanted to get in the business, there was a huge paranoia that Sony was going to own the living room. And that's what Sony was talking about back then.
Yeah. I mean, I heard this from an interview, which they were like, they took this as a serious challenge. Oh, yeah. The Sony guys were like, emotion engine, everything's going to be great, and we're going to be in your living room, and you're not even going to need a PC. And the people at Redmond were like, wait, what? Yeah. What did you just say? They just throw down, man?
You'd sit down in your living room with your nice Sony Trinitron and your nice Sony PS2 and your Sony couch and your...
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think that at this point, game consoles were an exclusively Japanese field. It was Nintendo, Sega, and Sony. So, the American forays into consoles ever since the console crash had really, pardon the pun, crashed and burned. Mm-hmm. Because the Atari Jaguar was the last one before this, and we don't have to say how much of a disaster that was. So before that, you had the 3DO, which was Trip Hawkins, the EA guys, kind of setting forth their foot in the arena.
Yeah.
And the Philips, Philips is Korean actually, right? Yep. So not that. But Atari was not a player anymore at this point. So for Microsoft to jump in, I do get that, which is like, okay, I mean, we can bring something to the table. And I think there's something to be said about that, Rick. It's good to have the Japanese mentality, but it's always good to have different perspectives. And I think that Microsoft and the American mentality kind of brings in aspects that the Japanese don't necessarily take into account. And so the mixture of those two kind of brings a synergy that allows improvements in technology, etc. So I think you need both of those sides. So it's good to have that diversification of developers.
Yeah.
And
I wonder
think,
how... Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, no, sorry. And I think this is the first time, even though we're definitely more with the Xbox 360 than with the Xbox, but it started with the Xbox. We're starting to show that the Japan is not the all to end all when it comes to video games, and that you actually can succeed. You know what I mean? Even if the Japanese don't exactly like it, which I know we'll get to, but obviously they hated it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't blame them.
Yeah, but I have to wonder how much of the Xbox's success is sort of not necessarily directly, but kind of tied into Sega's sort of bowing out from the console market altogether, in the sense that if the Dreamcast had been successful, then you have 4 competing consoles, and I wonder at what point sort of the scale gets tipped one way or the other if the market can support that many sort of competing interests. And then obviously you have Sega bringing over some of their big titles exclusively to the Xbox with Jet Set Radio Future, Shenmue 2, like stuff like that.
But Arnie, I think that you have to stretch the imagination so far in order for it to make that happen, because Sega was on a downhill slope by then.
That's true.
I think if Microsoft had come in, even if Sega was doing well, then that would have been their death knell. I honestly think that there was no reality in which Sega could have thrived.
Okay, so you think that if Microsoft had come in, they would have upended Sega anyway?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
I love Sega, but they were just not a well-run company.
Yeah.
And now they're doing a lot better, but historically they've been known for being so poorly run and the lack of communication between their divisions. So I think Microsoft, with their money, I think that's also something that we can't discount, which is the fact that Microsoft could just throw money at this thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't like Sega, who were really, at the end of the day, just dedicated to the video game business, and Nintendo as well. I mean, that was the difference, and that's why Sony and Microsoft were so scary, because Sony and Microsoft had other divisions that were profitable, so they could withstand the hits. So Sega could not go 2 years with losses and being in the red, because that's its main business. So they really could not afford to hemorrhage money. Whereas Sony and Sega, they could basically do so, which is effectively what happened with the Xbox and the PS3. They were just hemorrhaging money and not making money at all.
And
I think that somewhere in this universe, like there's a timeline where Sega actually released the first Yakuza game on the Dreamcast, and in that timeline, there's probably maybe no Nintendo or Xbox, but there's Dreamcast 3 with all the Yakuza games.
Masa, you would have to jump through so many timelines in order to get to that one. I mean, that's like Infinity Universe 20,467 or something.
I'm pretty sure that there's one universe like that. There has to be.
If that brings you comfort, Masa, then let's just say it is.
That's the same universe where the GameCube is a triangle and doesn't have a handle.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk back then too, because you guys were talking about how big Sony and Microsoft was. And I don't know about overseas, but I know in Japan it did well, but the GameCube did not do that great here.
Oh, no.
The Xbox
Not at
actually
all.
outsold it. And
Yep.
And the other thing was the Nintendo 64, and I know Nintendo fanboys are going to kill me, wasn't a huge success either. There was a lot of talk back then about the fact that maybe Nintendo was going to go the way of Sega. And I was getting super excited because I was like, awesome, I only have to own 2 consoles, and that's going to take care of everything. And all this great Nintendo stuff will be on the Xbox and it'll look better. And obviously that didn't happen, but...
and then they released the Wii.
For a moment there, because you said that
shovelware
Nintendo fanboys are going to kill you, for a moment there I was about to ask for your address, but then I remembered that, you would probably kick my ass real bad. So let's forget about that.
Well, that's the thing, right, is Nintendo sort of had the double whammy of, the N64 sort of alienated most of their third-party developers, and then the GameCube sort of followed up on that, being a good machine, but just, I think the library was limited in so many ways that it just sort of stymied sales of it a lot.
Well, I think ever since the 64, Nintendo has had kind of a death watch. So we had that with the GameCube, and then the Wii came out. And then we had that with the Wii U,
Yep.
and then the Switch came out.
Yep.
So Nintendo has been enormously lucky that they're thinking outside the box. Sometimes it leads them to fail miserably, but sometimes it leads them to great success, which is what we're seeing with the Switch now. And, we had a 2-part episode for the Nintendo Switch, so if you want to hear more about us talking about the Switch and Nintendo, go listen to those.
And
Which I
that's the
do
other
love.
thing is
I love
when you talk about companies that can afford to hemorrhage money, Nintendo was doing it with the handhelds, the Game Boy, the Game Boy Advance, the DS, 3DS. That was printing money forever,
Yeah, as long as Pokemon was a thing,
Exactly.
Nintendo could afford to take a big hit.
Yes.
So it was pretty massive. But, it was kind of a perfect storm for Microsoft to jump into the console arena around 2000. And the Dreamcast, the writing was on the wall even before its release in North America. They were not doing well. And everyone in the industry kind of knew it. And as soon as the PS2 jumped into the fray, that's it. It was absolutely done. So Microsoft really had an opportunity there that other consoles like the 3DO did not really have, beyond the myriad of other reasons why those consoles did not succeed. So it was, I think it was around 5 people that were really instrumental within Microsoft to create a console. This was not something that came from up top. This was something that really came from a few passionate individuals that were really taking Sony's challenge very seriously. So they really wanted to make sure that they did not miss out on this opportunity and that Sony did not really step into the arena of what was Microsoft's forte, which was essentially being a multimedia device, essentially, which was what the PCs were used to be back in the days. So some of these guys are Kevin Backus, Seamus Blackley, Otto Berkes, and Ted Haas. And there was another guy named Nat Brown that also was involved. But among those, Seamus Blackley was probably the one that is kind of attributed, whether you believe that or not, because that could be, kind of revisionist history. But generally, it's well known that he was kind of the guy that he came up with the idea of launching a console, for Microsoft to launch a console. So Seamus Blackley, actually, he came out from DreamWorks. He was actually the director of Trespasser, which was a terrible Jurassic Park game that is universally panned and generally known as one of the worst games of all time. But it was very ambitious, if nothing else. So he actually, even before that, he worked at Looking Glass Studios with Warren Spector, etc., and worked on System Shock. So he was a very, very smart guy, a brilliant guy.
He had a pedigree.
Very young at the time, and someone that really just wanted to eat the world. He was just like hungry, to make his mark. So Seamus Blackley talked with these other guys at Microsoft, and they just kind of started brainstorming. And so the seed was planted. So Seamus actually knew Bill Gates, and Bill Gates was the one that kind of, picked an interest in terms of being interested in him joining Microsoft, etc. So they were able to pitch the Xbox to Bill Gates, and Bill was skeptical at the time because he had seen the failures before, and he said that he would only enter if Microsoft could really differentiate itself. So, but they pitched a very ambitious plan, which was, look, we want to create a console that's completely ahead of its time, that doesn't have any limitations that, our developers are currently facing, and they really wanted to break through the technological barriers. So, Bill Gates was sold at the end of it, and so he greenlit the project. So at that point, Bill brought in Ed Fries, who was the head of Microsoft Game Studios at the time. And funny fact, I always pronounce his name in my mind as Ed Fries, but I think that may be a very common, thing. So that's what happened then. So it was named after DirectX. So all these people that actually came up with it, they were working on DirectX, which was kind of a framework for running games on PCs, etc. So that's actually how the Xbox had its name, which was Direct Xbox.
I feel like Microsoft sort of led the charge in this trend that I think we're seeing the peak of now in sort of moving consoles towards more PC-like architecture and sort of more PC-like environments. Like, I think we're seeing that now with the Xbox One, where instead of just creating a new system, it's sort of incremental upgrades over the years. You know what I mean? Because I think now we've reached the point where the jumps in graphical fidelity, in, improvements to the console are limited somewhat. So I think that's sort of like, eventually what they want is to make something kind of like your PC rig, where you just swap parts in and out and just make it better over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has to be with them that was started. And even now, I mean, Sony realized its folly with the PS3 because that was basically Ken Kutoragi's baby.
Yeah.
And Ken Kutoragi was, as Seamus said, he was a CPU guy. So they brought in a very different mentality that was very complex, and the cell processor was very complex, and it didn't need to be. So for developers, they had to basically learn this entire new toolset, and it's almost like learning a new language every time that they started developing on a new console. Mm-hmm. But with Microsoft, what they did was, okay, you know PCs, you use PCs all the time. All you need to do is apply those same techniques and skills in order to build games for our consoles. And now, with the PS4, I mean, that's basically a console with an American mindset in terms of how it was developed. Because that was basically Mark Cerny, who is a guy that was a game developer. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing the start of that with the original Xbox. So you're seeing the kind of, let's just say, PCification of the console in a way. Rick, any thoughts on that?
Actually, I was going to backtrack because that's what I do. I'm an old man, so I tell stories. But, you know, the funny thing I thought about, well, I heard the story of how the Xbox name came about, and you all know because it came from, like you said, Direct Xbox. But I guess the marketing department freaking hated that name. And I was listening to this story that Seamus was telling where they threw that Xbox, the marketing department threw that Xbox name in with a bunch of other names, just threw it in there hoping to bury it. But yet every single focus group they had was like, no, that's the one. Yeah, we love that Xbox name. That's awesome. So he had the last laugh on that one.
So I guess it was fortuitous. I mean, I know that they just called it because it was easy. They just called it, but I can imagine a world in which, you know, Microsoft came up with a really ridiculous name like the Vita or something.
Yeah. Or the Xbox
Honestly,
One.
Xbox is just an American name for an American console. You know, it just screams like in your face, just like extreme.
All the time, everything is
it's really a product
extreme
of
to the
its
max.
time. And potentially one of the reasons why it failed in Japan, because the X in Japan is not a good omen. So I think that maybe there was a little bit of a cultural taboo with that name. But I think right now it's become so ubiquitous that people just accept it, except in Japan where the Xbox is just basically sold as a Blu-ray player.
Yeah.
But, you know, right now, you know, the Xbox is the Xbox. Everyone knows it. And it's just kind of a product of its time. Again, because as already said, we had the X games and everything had to be extreme back in the day. But, you know, interestingly enough, DirectX was the reason why it became the Xbox.
And that PC architecture, I mean, the guys love programming for it. You know, you listen to those old programmers from back then and they're like, oh, it was so much easier to make games for the Xbox than the PS2.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the PS2 was not an easy console to develop for, which, again, it just seems very ironic because the PS1, the reason for its success was how easy it was to develop. It was a very developer-friendly console. So it's just strange that with the PS2, Ken Kutoragi just went the complete opposite way. I think a lot of it is hubris, and a lot of it is just the Japanese ego. You know, it's like, we're going to do it this way, and you're going to accept it. And that's the same thing that doomed Nintendo with the Nintendo 64, where they were just like, you're going to use carts, and you're going to accept it. And you're not going to need CDs. So I think it really backfired. But with the PS2, it was just so big, and the catalog was just so great that there really
especially
wasn't a way
with the backwards compatibility. I mean, you're starting right out the gate. You got so many games.
You already got a library. You already have a library. Yeah. So the Xbox was finally announced by Bill Gates and The Rock back when he was not called Dwayne Johnson, and he was just asking you to smell what he's cooking. And this was at GDC 2000, so the Game Developers Conference. And if you guys remember, the original prototype model was actually a Chrome X. Literally, it was an X. And I remember seeing this on the magazines, and I was like, how is that functional?
There is no greater sadness that I've ever felt when that didn't become the actual retail version of the Xbox.
It's almost like the same thing as the Boomerang for the PS3, if you guys remember.
Yes, the Boomerang controller. That was amazing.
I mean, some of the prototypes that you see whenever they're first released just are absolutely absurd. it was literally an X. I mean, and you can't get any more American than that. It's
That,
like,
I mean,
we're just gonna give you a
obviously-
shiny Chrome X.
It probably would have cost like $700, and it would have been impossible to ship anywhere. But wouldn't that just have been the most amazing thing to put in your living room?
Oh, hands
Yeah.
down. Yeah. There's a guy right now online I was watching, and I apologize to him because I don't have his name, but who's actually machining that X right
Oh,
now.
hell yeah.
And then he's going to try to get to actually be able to fit an Xbox in there.
That's amazing.
And I can't wait. Yeah.
But as with most, mythical pieces of technology, it was also colossally faulty. So it was legendarily faulty. So it would just shut down all the time. And there's actually a funny story of one of the guys, Kevin Backus, while Bill Gates was demoing the thing at one of the conferences. They actually had two of the prototypes running, and there was Kevin Backus underneath the table actually waiting to see if it crashed to flip a switch to go on to the next one so that it would keep on running. And thankfully that didn't happen, but it was known to be a faulty piece of tech. So, I mean, and you could imagine, it's a bunch of wires and stuff inside a literal Chrome X. So I could see how that could be a problem.
Yeah.
But let me ask you guys, Amasa, let me ask you, do you think Microsoft was taking a risk? Considering that Sony and Nintendo were so big at the time and Sega was just, on its way out.
I would say absolutely, but at the time I thought that, okay, so if there's one company that could make it happen and, kind of like force themselves into the market,
Yeah.
it would have to be Microsoft because, the biggest company in the world, the richest man in the world. So I was very sure that if they were like legit serious about the whole having our own console thing, that they would be able to make it happen. If there's one company, it would have been, Microsoft.
Yeah.
I
What
agree.
do you think, Rick?
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I just messed
Yeah,
up.
I mean, but if you think about it, though, it's almost like thinking, okay, Google is coming out with a console. Like, you could see it, you could see that they could afford it,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you say, well, it's Google. I mean,
Yeah.
they do digital things.
It's almost
They don't
like
really do-
if Steam decided to make a console,
well,
like if they
kinda did,
made
but
one and it
Yeah.
just wasn't very good, kind of
But I
like
think-
that.
I think one of the aspects that really made Microsoft stand out and that, we see it much more nowadays is that they really listen to the developers.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's because they were developers themselves.
Yeah.
And they asked developers, okay, what is it that you need? So you need more memory, let's give you more memory. You need more graphical processing, let's do it. You need a faster CPU, okay, let's make it happen. And they really wanted to have a system that they really thought, if we make this the best system it could be, then people will buy it. And, it's a very audacious mentality. And I think to some extent they were right. They just were not expecting the PS2 to just do so well.
Well, I think I think they were I think it's a little bit of a balancing act, right? Like, obviously you want the best, you want to try to fit the best components in there with the best sort of performance you can, but you also don't want to be the Neo Geo, right? Like, you don't want to make a system that's like obviously head and shoulders above everything else, but so expensive that nobody can afford to buy it.
Well, but that's the thing. They kind of did build a Neo Geo.
Correct.
That's the ironic
But it
part.
wasn't.
And they
But
just
it
lost
wasn't
a lot of money on it.
$1,000.
But they just lost a lot of money on it, and it was just. I think their mentality was they had read one of the books on Sony and their mentality and how they were built, and Sony's mentality was, and I can't stress this enough. They were really looking to Sony as their rival, but also as their inspiration.
Yeah.
And their mentality was, okay, you release something, at a loss with the best components that you could have, and then 2 years down the line, the market will catch up and the components will be a little bit cheaper. Mm-hmm. And so they were banking on the technology being cheaper in the future, but they released it while it was still just making a loss for them.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
Absolutely.
putting an 8 gig hard drive in there, the cost for that. I mean,
absolutely,
I know
not only the cost, but the size factor.
Yeah, and,
I mean, that made it incredibly bigger.
yeah. Seamus said he fought the hell out of that to get that hard drive in there.
But it has to be one of the most forward-thinking, probably the most forward-thinking thing they did. I mean, after I had the Xbox and I had a hard drive, I said, this needs to be a thing with every single console.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't need a memory card.
A stack of memory cards for all your games.
I could save music on it. I could do so many things. It just really opened up a Pandora's box.
And I mean, that's really great for, retro gaming as well, because, like, I mean, I got my, Xbox just a few years ago. But it was like such a pleasant surprise. I was like, oh my god, there's actually a hard drive? Like, I don't have to, hunt down memory cards, which can be, like, really difficult to find nowadays.
Yep.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, and, the Microsoft people were just like, why are we putting a hard drive? Why are we making it more expensive? And all the developers, Seamus, Ed Fries, etc., they were all saying, we absolutely need to have that. This needs to be in there. And I think it was a great decision, ultimately, even if it led to them not succeeding because it was so expensive.
I mean, I think that what Microsoft did, and I think it's fair, I just think that when you're a consumer in the moment, you don't think about it, is I think what they did is they put all the cost up front, right? There's 4 controller ports. You don't have to spend money on like a multi-tap or something. We put this hard drive in. You don't have to buy a stack of memory cards. Like all these little costs that I think are inherent with a console like the PS2 that you don't think about until you're in it and you have to buy that stuff. And I think Microsoft sort of put it all up on Front Street for people.
And having an Ethernet port at that time on the launch console, that's
absolutely
pretty nuts,
Yeah, I mean, so I guess what people were thinking is Microsoft for real, or is this just something that they're dabbling in? And I think the purchase of Bungie was a stroke of brilliance. I think that was really what made people think, okay, Microsoft is really doing this. Because Bungie at the time, they were developing Halo, but they were developing it for the PC and the Mac. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, they were already a known entity. They were usually more of an Apple developer because Marathon originally came out on the Apple computers. And Myth came out on the PC, etc. But, Bungie was a big buy for them. It was a big purchase. And I think if they hadn't done that, I don't think we'd be talking about Microsoft nowadays. I honestly think so. Let's talk a little bit about the architecture and the features before we actually go into the software. So, Rick, let me ask you, what do you think about the physical design of the console? Like, what do you actually think about the aesthetics of the console?
So I think when it came out, I had the first viewpoint of everybody else. Jesus Christ, this thing's massive, and I immediately was like, yeah, this is going to die in Japan. But when you crack into it, then you get it. Once you get in there and you're like, oh, I mean, like we said, it's basically PC architecture. So you get in there, you see the hard drive.
It's like, how could it not be massive?
Yeah, exactly. You see the big heat sinks, and of course, the biggest thing, the DVD drive. That's what takes up the most room in there. And then you see it and you're like, they didn't really have another option. I mean, if you're gonna build it like a PC, I mean, I just don't see another way right now. There's people that are making Slims now, but the first thing they do is they take that DVD drive out and they either use the board or they flash a BIOS. And then just to bypass the DVD check, Yeah,
the DVD drive was killer for that. I mean, it took up like 50% of the space there.
Easily.
And it's funny because a lot of people didn't even use the DVD drive because you needed a controller in order to use it, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
To play movies? Yeah.
Yes. So, which was not something you needed for the PS2, and I happen to think that that's the reason why Sony succeeded with the PS2, because it was a cheap DVD player. And Microsoft just kind of fumbled that with requiring a controller in order to play DVDs. So kind of ironic. But Arnie, what do you think about the console itself?
Oh, I hated it. Like when I first saw it, I thought it was terrible. Like not only really it was because one, it's massive, obviously. Two, it's just like it was so heavy, and whenever I would want to play multiplayer games with friends, I'm already got to lug another CRT over there, and now I also got to carry this like 10-pound behemoth. So it was just like, I thought it was just so impractical, and really as a kid, like it wasn't as sleek looking to me as the PS2. Like the PS2 was just look kind of futuristic, and like Sony did what they said they were going to do, is they were trying to make a machine that would sort of fit in with the rest of your setup at that point. So it's like, hard edges, sort of matte black, sort of hides once you put it in your sort of set up with everything else. The Xbox can't help but stand out. Like, it's got a big honking green light right in the front of the machine. Like, it's gigantic. So, when I first got it, I did not like the aesthetic of it at all, but it sort of grows on you after a while. You know what I mean? Like, because of all that it can do and because of the games that were on it, it does grow on you. But like we talked about before, I think they did a much better version going forward, like with the 360, and now the One is essentially, you could mistake it for a Blu-ray player if you were just like walking down an aisle.
Yeah. Masa, did you remember having any impressions on how the Xbox looked?
Okay, so first of all, yeah, I mean, like we just talked about, like, oh my god, it was so massive. Especially like for a Nintendo fanboy, like I had my cute little GameCube. And then there's like this
that had a carry
motherfucker of a machine. I was like, whoa. And then when I actually like got my own, like it was a very cheap, like a 15-euro flea market pickup. I was like, holy shit, this is like legit heavy. And even nowadays, okay, so I have my TV stand with a bunch of consoles. Unfortunately, it's not big enough for every console that I own. So I don't have my OG Xbox hooked up to the TV. But yeah, I actually have this shelf for like the retro consoles, and I have all my Dreamcast and NES and so on there. But Xbox is too big for that, so I gotta keep it in a closet.
Yeah, I think that's a story with a lot of people.
It's just one thing I will give Xbox. Like, it wasn't just big for the sake of being big. Like Mas said, that thing is heavy. Like, there's some shit inside of it.
Well, I mean, it weighs almost 9 pounds.
Yeah.
So it's really, really heavy. But, you could say anything about the original Xbox other than it's cute. It's not a cute console. It's really a monster. And for some reason, I mean, I liked it. I mean, it was massive, and it really took up a lot of my space in my multimedia center. And you could clearly tell that there was this big hulking presence, but I liked it. I don't know why. I mean, maybe it was the green and the fact that I love green and that it just lit up with that green power button. But I thought it was not cute, but, beautiful in its own way. So, but if the outside was beautiful, I mean, the inside was really where it was. I mean, it had a super fast processor from Intel. It had an NVIDIA graphics chips. It had a 64 megabyte DDR, and actually they were even considering doing 128 megabyte DDR RAM. So it was a very fast machine. And as I said, it even supported up to 1080i. Mm-hmm. And as Rick mentioned, it had an Ethernet port. So, but as we said, I think the biggest thing was the hard drive. It was the first console with a hard drive. It had 8 gigabytes, which, if you don't remember, that was pretty big for the time.
Yeah.
Like, for the saving, if you're just saving, you could save about 1,000 games in there and still not run out, basically.
Yeah, weren't the big official Sony memory cards like 16 megabytes or something like that?
Oh yeah. And that was sufficient for saving games back in the day. I mean, it really took you a long time to get to that limit. So imagine 8 gigabytes with the Xbox.
Oh yeah.
And so you could rip music into it and actually play within the game. So I remember playing this in Grand Theft Auto. There was just a radio station just dedicated to your ripped music. And it was funny because the other day I put the Xbox back on, and I just kind of went back to see what kind of music I was playing back in the day, and it's just like Exhibit, Tupac, 50 Cent. So it was kind of like a memory lane, trip, basically. Go ahead.
Sorry. And I go to, because I pick them up all the time, and I mod them from friends and stuff, and then I just get a few Teslas, because I'm kind of lucky here. I can usually pick them up for like $15 to $20 at Goodwill.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, so I get to dick around with them. But it's funny, you were talking about the music. I picked up 2, and I came home, and I loved looking to see what music's on there. So the first one I had 50 Cent on it, and I was like, okay, that's cool. And then the very next one had Alvin and the Chipmunks on it.
Hell yeah.
So it was just like screeching from hell, basically, at that point. But Rick, what do you think about the hard drive?
Oh, I mean, it's amazing that they did it. I mean, and again, 8 gigs, I don't think people realize, what that is, back then. And I think the price has surprised us. Again, mine was modded, so I was pretty lucky. I was actually putting movies on it. It's one of the ways I would smuggle porn into the desert. So we
That's
went on,
amazing.
yeah, we
Good
went
old
on
days.
yeah, because we went on deployments, and you'd come off the plane, like Saudi or something like that, and they would have actually the locals there would be checking you out, like a customs thing, and they would look at the laptops, making sure you weren't, bringing in porn and that kind of stuff, or alcohol, or any of the other stuff that wasn't allowed. But you're not going to look at Xbox for that. So I mean, it was kind of our porn smuggling machine.
I'm pretty sure all your fellow servicemen were very, very happy with you. I'm very happy for Microsoft for putting in that hard drive.
Yeah, exactly, right. And you get quite a few movies on there too, trust me.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, and I think also, speaking about your fellow servicemen, Rick, I mean, the fact that it had 4 controller ports must have been absolutely amazing, because you could play Halo on that and everyone could join in. So I imagine that was a big part of your experience with it as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, Halo 2, and we were talking about the PC architecture. There's a lot of things that came over to the Xbox that just couldn't be played on anything else. Mm-hmm. The 2 biggest ones is, I mean, Half-Life 2 and Doom 3. Look at those games today. Pop those in and watch them. I mean, they're still gorgeous. And there's just no way anybody else could have ran those games.
Yeah, even stuff like Morrowind. I mean, for the time is crazy that they fit that onto an actual console.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what it would have been like if Xbox had a little bit more freedom to create its own experiences and had more time to really blossom, and what kind of experiences could have been achieved there, because there's a future in which something like what you would see in the 360 could actually have been achieved on the original Xbox.
Yeah.
And actually, even when the 360 came out, there were a lot of games, for example, Burnout Revenge is the one that comes to mind, that played better on the original Xbox than on the 360. Mm-hmm. So it was still a very advanced console even when it was on its way out. So with that said, let me ask you a quick question. This is going to be controversial. What are your thoughts on the Duke, Rick?
Okay, so I did not like it. I'm not a fan of the Duke. Having said that, looking back, it's kind of quaint, The story goes, now I can't confirm this, just one of the stories I heard from one of the guys at Microsoft in an interview, is that they sent out to actually have the circuit board developed for that controller. And it was like somebody's cousin or something. And this thing comes back and it's just massive. And so then they gave it to this gal, I think her name was Denise, and she had to fashion a controller around this giant dinner plate of a board. I know Blackley, he fought the hell out of it. And I think, the story goes, he went ahead and he's like, I'll get my hard drive, I'll suck up the Duke, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then he pressed, the funny part about that is he pressed, while he was in Japan, trying to canvassing all of them to just basically tell Microsoft, yes, we need a smaller controller. I guess at the exact same time, the Steel Battalion paperwork came across his desk to get Microsoft to approve. So on one hand, he's shooting for a smaller controller, but then he's asking them to okay the largest controller ever created.
But when you see the controller, you kind of had to wonder, were they just doomed from the start?
Yeah. Because
it was a really big mistake. I mean, it's not an Atari Jaguar type mistake, and I know that, Rick, you're a big defender of the Jaguar controller, but it was a pretty big mistake, particularly for someone at the time. I must have been, I guess, 13, and I was even 12, and I played it, and it was just too big for my hands. I mean, if you imagine a 90-year-old trying to play with that controller, it's kind of unthinkable.
Yeah.
It's really unconscionable.
I will say that, I think that Microsoft was not necessarily aiming for the younger crowd. I think they were trying to hit that sort of teenage to young adult demographic. So maybe that's why they weren't that pressed about it. But that controller to me, it's just not, it doesn't feel ergonomic in the same way that like even a GameCube or a PS2 controller does. It works. Like, don't get me wrong, it's playable, but it's like, why would you want to sort of scenario?
It just has this huge metal X in the front, and the circuit board theory. I mean, that kind of makes perfect sense. But at the time, you didn't know this, and you were like, why the hell would they put this massive X? It just takes up all the space. So, I looked at it and I said, I don't think I can do this. But thankfully, when I got my Xbox, they already had released the S version. Mm-hmm. So the S version is really not too different from the one that we currently have for the Xbox One.
Yeah.
But, Masa, did you try this at the time?
Actually, no. And I guess I should consider myself lucky that my Xbox actually came with the S1. So I have not had the displeasure of ever using the Duke.
Yeah.
Well, you need to buy the new one, the one done by Hyperkin.
Yeah, that lights up.
Oh God, I don't know why I bought that. It's funny when I bought that one from Hyperkin with the whole screen lights up. You know,
Yeah.
I looked at the guy and I said, "This is dumb. I know this is dumb. I know this is stupid."
But I'm an Xbox guy, so I have to get it.
But it's got a screen on it, dude. It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, I mean, the Controller S was, I think, one of the best revisions ever made. It has to be. And I think one of the best forward-thinking things that it was only, relevant for a few years, but breakaway cables. The controllers on the Xbox, if you stumbled upon them, they would break away. So everyone has a memory of, their mom walking and just like destroying all their consoles
Yanking
because she was cleaning and she just yanked everything. And, you said goodbye to your PS1 one last time. But Microsoft was really thinking about this, and they had breakaway cables. So, this wasn't relevant by the time the wireless, controllers came into the fold. But I think for the time, I mean, it was really big for me.
Yeah.
So
I think the offset joysticks are the biggest thing Microsoft's ever given us.
Big time. I love that.
Potentially.
Without a doubt. And the thing is, it's funny, it's one of those things like, I never thought I needed it until I had it, but then once I had it, I'm like, this is so much better than...
It's a weird thing, yeah. I mean, because you think about the DualShock, and they're both on the same plane.
Yeah.
And you could clearly see how someone with bigger thumbs would struggle with that a little bit. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of makes perfect sense to just put them apart, but... it's not intuitive, but then when you play it, it just makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
Every FPS game I buy, if it's cross-platform, I buy for Xbox. Simply because,
absolutely.
I love it, but I do like all the PlayStation stuff too. But FPSs are just so much better for me anyway with that thumbstick layout.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed.
But also, let me just say, we can't talk about controllers without talking about Steel Battalion. And Rick, I know that you just got this.
Ooh, my baby.
But it's one of perhaps the most niche controller ever made. And you actually need a lot of space in order to play it. So Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Steel Battalion controller?
So I am new to the whole Steel Battalion thing, but yeah, I'm in love with this. Just we talk about the Xbox being massive. This thing's no joke. Yeah, so hopefully people have seen it or at least heard about it. It's kind of famous. I mean, it is the largest controller for a console ever built. It's 40 or 41 buttons, and every button actually has a purpose too.
Function.
And the thing is, when you
including the pedals, right? Because there's like four pedals.
Yeah, there's 3 pedals on it. You've got 2 joysticks. You've got a gear shift lever. Because you got to go from first to fifth. There is communication stuff. I mean, you can shoot chaff. You got submachine gun. And the thing about it is probably the most important button on all of this is the eject button.
Yeah.
Because
otherwise you lose your memory, right?
That's the whole thing. No, your game's over. Like, if you die, you're done. I died the other day, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go back. They didn't even have my pilot information anymore. It was just like you've never played the game before. And I was like, you guys are dicks.
See, it's funny. This to me is like making up for the Xbox not being that giant Chrome X. Is like, this is the kind of ridiculous shit that I always wanted as a kid. I think that's why like the Neo Geo always really appealed to me, is because like I want the ridiculously large, like insane shit in my house. Like, I feel like that's sort of the gamer vision of like what video gaming kind of aspires to be, right? Like, bring that arcade experience home and make it as ridiculous as possible.
Oh, my wife!
Does it
saw
feel
this
sturdy?
No, it's real sturdy. Yeah, it's real sturdy. And I actually bought mine. I kind of took a chance on a guy that doesn't sell video game stuff, and I got mine fairly cheap. And it was broken, and it was broken in the fact that it just started it would shoot off to the left when you went to go put your name in. So I took one of the controllers apart and cleaned it up, and you can see there's a lot of quality in there. I mean, all it was just a dirty circuit board, so I was able to fix it. And in the end, I ended up only paying $100 for it. So
that's perfect.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah, I'm super happy with it. It's really durable, especially the foot pedals. They have to be. But I mean, when I got this thing, because I have a small game room, I don't have like a huge basement or anything. And my wife saw it and she was like, where the hell are you going to put that? And I told her, I don't care. One of the kids can move out. I don't care because I have to have this.
This is going in here.
Yeah, and I actually moved it for this podcast, so you all owe me something because that's
well, and that's the thing too, right? Like, I feel like maybe this is just me, and I'm just projecting onto people, but I'm like, I've always wanted to pilot a giant fucking robot. And
me too, dude. I wanted this so bad.
You can use a controller, and that's one thing. But the feel, like, just the ability to sit down and like have this array and like sort of feel it and do all the stuff. I can't imagine, like, just the immersion of it alone is probably worth the price of admission for me.
Oh,
and you gotta realize, I mean, this was a time that Gundam was really big here in the United States.
Yeah.
So I really wanted this because the more immersion you give me, the more I'm into it.
Yeah.
And again, the eject button to me was a big deal. I was like, you can actually eject. That, attention to detail is something I think only the Japanese could do because only they are crazy enough to come up with a controller like this.
What were you going to say, Rick?
Oh, what I was going to say, and the other thing is, too, is that there's no, like, you don't play the game and they start, like, walking you through, okay, now do this, do that. No, it's just basically, okay, here you go, you're a rookie, oh, everything's gone to shit, and now you get in this mech, and you have no idea what you're doing. The manual that you get with the game is really sparse, and they tell you, hey, make sure you check the manual that's actually for just the controller. And that's 35 pages long, if I remember right. But I have to say, when you first start playing it, you're totally lost, and I like tipped my mech over a couple times. And even starting it, you're trying to figure out how the hell to start this thing, and it lights up, and it kind of like a little light will tell you, okay, now you hit the ignition, now you hit the cockpit hatch and the start. But then you're sitting there, and all these gauges are up, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And well, these little toggle switches you have to do to check your oil, to check your gas, to check your this. And at first, it's daunting and it's a little silly. But then, like, pretty soon, you're feeling it. You're like, yeah, and you're hitting all these switches, and you get some muscle memory as where to go to hit the chafe and stuff. And it really is just, like you said, you're right. It's an immersive experience. Once you get into this thing, and I'm only about 4 levels into it, and, I'm locking myself in my room and totally nerding out with this thing. Yeah.
All right, and with that, let's take a quick break so that we can talk about the launch lineup and some of the games on the Xbox. So we'll be back.
All right.
Alright guys, and we are back, and let's talk about the release. So, the Xbox released in North America in November of 2001. It was actually going to release earlier, but because of the September 11th events, it was pushed back, and I think ultimately that was for the better. Microsoft was a little bit concerned that Nintendo was going to release the GameCube at the same time, but they actually pushed back their release to the end of November. So, Microsoft was actually the first one out of the gate with respect to Nintendo. By then, the PS2 had already been out for a year, so October 26, 2000 was when the PS2 released in North America, and in March of 2000 in Japan. So
was
the
Dreamcast fully dead at this point? By the time
absolutely. It was discontinued in March of 2001, so they stopped making hardware at that time. And by this point, the only games that came out were like Shenmue 2 in Europe and Sonic Adventure 2, I think. But those were like the death knell. Those were like the last dying gasp of the Dreamcast. And, unfortunate because it was around this time, actually, that I actually got the Dreamcast in exchange for a PS1. I gave away my PS1 and I got a Dreamcast instead, which I think was a great, great deal because I could play PS1 games on the PS2.
Yeah.
But I digress. So it released for $299, not $2,000. And that would have been the equivalent.
Price.
Yeah, so it would have been the equivalent of $425, and accounting for inflation. So, a little bit expensive, but not really break the bank expensive like, the $600 PS3. The launch lineup was pretty diverse. looking at these games, I see a few standouts. I see Dead or Alive 3. I see Cell Damage, which was kind of a Twisted Metal type of game.
Fusion Frenzy,
which I used to love until I played it again and I realized it's shit. Halo, of course, that's an absolute big one. And of course, your litany of EA sports games like Madden, NASCAR. Actually, Xbox had its own NFL game, which was called NFL Fever. But the big ones also Project Gotham Racing and Oddworld, Munch's Odyssey, which continued the Oddworld series, which is very niche. So you wouldn't expect this game to light the world on fire, and it didn't. But it was part of the launch lineup. And so Masa, what did you think of this lineup? Do you think it was a good one?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, like you mentioned, there's lots of variety. Like, yeah, you have sports games. Yeah, you have a fighting game. You have a platformer. Yeah, you have a something for the kids. Like, you have Shrek. You have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and of course Halo. Like, one of the biggest franchises ever. I mean, of course not at this point. Okay, so I would have to say that overall, like the launch lineup, there's not a whole lot of games that are still like, remembered. Maybe, like Project Gotham Racing, Oddworld, of course Dead or Alive and Halo. A lot of those games are kind of forgotten, but sometimes you just need that one killer app, kind of like with the Switch. Like the Switch didn't have the best launch lineup, but it, had Breath of the Wild, and that's all it needed. And I think with Xbox, yeah, Halo, like that was enough.
Yeah. What do you think, Arnie?
I think that the launch lineup sort of shows what the Xbox was all about, right? Like the Xbox, I think in my vision of it, did two things very well: racing games, which clearly there is a lot of here, and FPSs, which there's a couple of here, and obviously Halo is going to start that trend. But I mean, like Masa said, there is some diversity here. And there's a good amount of games, too. I feel like sometimes, systems come out with not that many games. And so even if they are great games, people, I think, when a system first comes out are looking to buy maybe 2, 3, 4 games. So the fact that you have options is awesome. No
also,
RPGs
I have to say that in
I could see.
Looking at the launch lineup, and then if you guys remember the infamous Xbox One, I think it was the E3 press conference, where it was basically just sports. So yeah, I mean, I guess the it's all thanks to the OG Xbox that the sports games ended up becoming quite big on that system.
Yep.
Well, but let me say something that you notice when you're looking at these games, though, is that there are only 2 Japanese developed games. And that's Air Force Delta Storm, and the other one is Dead or Alive 3 by Tecmo. And that kind of sets the tone for what the Xbox experience would be like. Mm-hmm. Basically a complete dearth of Japanese experiences. And when compared to the PS2, I'm thinking back to the PS2 launch lineup, it was almost 70% Japanese. And Microsoft was just the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's still like that. Like, if you think about, okay, so Xbox One is still getting, Japanese games, but there's not a whole lot of exclusive games. Like, I can't really think of any. Maybe Recore, that might have been
Japanese I think it was.
But
that was done in collaboration with some of the former Retro guys.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it wasn't Japanese developed, actually.
Yeah.
They had a Japanese designers. I think Keiji Inafune was there, but it wasn't
I'm like,
really a
that
Japanese
might actually
game.
be the closest thing to an actual Japanese exclusive on Xbox One.
Yeah. What do you think, Rick? I mean, do you think that this was a good lineup?
Yeah, I mean, it was a decent lineup. I mean, to be honest, it was just all about Halo. Like you said, it was just very much like Breath of the Wild was for the Switch, which I didn't even care what else the Switch had for months while I was playing that. And it was the same thing with this. Halo just overshadowed everything. And that was the one that made you want to buy an Xbox. I mean, you would see guys doing LAN. I didn't, but you see guys doing LAN parties, and I know it was more like Halo 2 when it went online. But I mean, that just dominated everything. And we were super excited, at least my group was very excited about a new Oddworld game.
Yeah? I mean, did you play the original ones back in the day?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I played every single one of them. Some really good, some maybe not so good. And that Project Gotham Racing we didn't really care about, but then when guys started getting their hands on it, I was like, hey, wow, this is pretty good. This is all right.
Yeah.
I'm more of a fan of the arcade racers, but I mean, let's be honest. I mean, really, Project Gotham has just exploded over the years. It's just gotten better and better. Every itineration just seems to get better.
Yeah, but I think we cannot understate the importance of Halo. And you mentioned it, Rick, that there were these LAN parties, everything. It was a phenomenon. You know, it was bigger than Mario. It was a huge, huge thing. And parents, you know, if they knew anything, they knew Halo. Because every kid was playing it. So for Xbox, this was the Halo box. You could basically just rename it Halo box and no one would flinch an eye.
Yeah.
So it really, I think in many ways, it salvaged Xbox. Like, you can't really have Xbox without Halo.
No.
And now it's kind of difficult to think back on that because Halo's popularity has kind of waned with Call of Duty, etc. But Halo was such an influential game for the brand that I don't think that you really can understate the importance of it. So, I mean, for me specifically, I did not play first-person shooters before this. And Halo was the one that really turned me on into first-person shooters. I was not a PC player, etc. So for me, it had to be on a console. And after this, I said, okay, that's it. I'm into this. So it really was revolutionary for its time.
I think one of the things, not just Halo, but the Xbox in general did, is it really showed that, you know, you can play an FPS and be good at it and not have to have a PC.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I understand the PC players, you know, the PC elite, and I love PC gamers. I PC game, but you know, back then it was, you know, they were always shoving stuff in your face. You know, you guys can't play FPSs, you know, that kind of stuff. But at least, or well, but it really showcased that you can definitely on a console play FPS, play it well, and compete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really bridged that gap in many ways. You finally felt like, okay, we could actually play on a console and it's not so bad.
Yeah, and I think the move away from it not being a World War II game made it much more appealing to me, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Masa, let me ask you, was Halo a thing back in Finland?
I wouldn't say, because like I mentioned before, that the OG Xbox wasn't exactly like that big in Finland. But the later Halo games, especially Halo 3 and 4, like, yeah, I mean, those were massive games. Like, absolutely some of the biggest games of that era.
Okay, yeah. Well, and another thing that really buoyed Xbox was the release of Xbox Live, which came only a year after the Xbox was launched. So, as we said, the Xbox launched with an Ethernet port, so it had built-in broadband capabilities from the outset. So compared to other systems, for example, the Dreamcast, it had a modem, but it didn't really have, you know, the capability to do fast speed internet. So with Xbox Live, it was this closed ecosystem that really made it easy to go online, have your gamer tag, join up with friends, and play games together. So really, Xbox Live was the moment that online gaming really entered the scene. So it released in November of 2002, and it cost $49.99 a year, which would be about $70 in today's market. But it really opened up a Pandora's box for gamers. And this was the first moment where everyone just really started realizing, oh, playing with other people is fun. Not me, because I don't like to play with other people, but many people did.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, a lot of people were thinking that Microsoft was making a mistake by putting so much of their efforts into the online service. But, you know, they were proven wrong because it was a massive success for them.
Yeah.
So, Rick, did you play on Xbox Live back on the OG Xbox?
Now, I didn't. I played at a buddy's house. I didn't play with my Xbox because, again, mine was chipped. And, you know, there was all kind of rumors that, you know, they're going to ban you or, you know, they could send a signal back and fry your Xbox. Yeah, so, I mean, it just made me panic, you know. So I never did with my Xbox, but a buddy had it. And I think I was really impressed that, at least I don't remember, like, serious lag problems or anything like that. And to be able to play back then without these issues and have it going pretty well. And, you know, the other thing is, it really set them up for when the Xbox 360 came out, because the Xbox 360 online service was amazing, and just to me, head and shoulders above anything else anybody was doing. And I think that all came from all the time they spent with the OG Xbox. I mean, they really set themselves up for success with that.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember because Sony came out with their Ethernet adapter, which was basically a hard drive that had an Ethernet port, and I was the one that bought that. And I remember it being so fiddly. You actually had to open the expanse port and plug in the thing and put in a disk in order to install the service, etc. And I tried to play SOCOM, and it was just a lot less convenient because every game kind of had to have its own dedicated servers, etc. Whereas with Xbox, everything was done by Microsoft, so it felt like an integrated service.
Yeah.
And that was really just a massive improvement. And to be honest, I played the PS2 a few times online, and then I just said, I'm not doing this anymore. And, I threw away the hard drive at some point back, many years back. Whereas with Xbox, the servers are down, but, it's still there. And if someone would, want to do something again with it, they certainly could.
There's guys that still play right now that still play Halo 2 that have their own servers, and there's guys that are still playing Steel Battalion online.
Yeah.
And
Arnie, do you play online?
listen, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this wasn't a big deal, but for me it was just the death of sort of local co-op multiplayer, and I really enjoyed that stuff, like online never really appealed to me. I think I tried it a couple times, but it just, it's not the same for me. And I'm glad that, it worked out, because I think it lets people who might otherwise not be able to play multiplayer games, sort of do that. But to me, it sort of, started moving developers towards, being multiplayer focused. And I think it hurt a lot of single-player experiences in games. And just, no local co-op, man. I need that. I like that.
Yeah, I mean,
you're a screen looker. That's why. You like looking at other people's screens and cheating.
Absolutely. And I also like to turn to somebody sitting right next to me and tell them to go fuck themselves while I'm, staring them in the eye.
Yeah.
That's, also my thing. Yelling into a microphone just doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah, I think this was the inception of the move away from single player and local co-op and local multiplayer.
Yeah. But like you said, it was revolutionary, no doubt.
Yeah,
the ability to play.
And you could have different opinions about it, but I think ultimately it was an advancement for the medium. I think that we are seeing kind of a circle back to how it used to be, and we're seeing that you don't necessarily need to have one or the other. It's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
But I think it did, for a time period, it did move away from the single-player experiences, etc. Just to run off some of the notable games, beyond Halo, of course, which Halo 2 was actually... Halo 1 was actually not online, but Halo 2 was, and it was a massive, massive game. But some of the other games that were big back in the day were Counter-Strike, Rainbow Six 3, Ghost Recon, Phantasy Star Online, which was kind of a successor to the Dreamcast one.
Which still has... I think people still run servers for that, too.
Yeah, I think so. I remember Return to Castle Wolfenstein was a big one. A lot of people played that one. And Midtown Madness, which was, a pretty niche series that actually found a lot of success on Xbox Live. So, yeah, I mean, Xbox Live, what else can we say about it? It was massive. It continues to be big. It continues to influence the way that we play games online. So it really was a success.
Yeah.
So let's take another quick break, and then we can jump back into the games.
All right.
Understand the concept of love. Understand the concept of love. Understand the concept of love.
All right, guys, so we're back, and let's talk about the games. We've already talked about Halo, and we've referenced a few games here and there, but I really want to throw it back to the team now and ask, what are some of the games that Xbox, interested players should play? So Rick, if you had 3 games that you would recommend to someone that is new to the Xbox, what games would you tell them to play?
All right, so obviously Halo 2. I mean, you have to.
Yeah.
The other one, and I would pick exclusives definitely. Give you a different experience. Half-Life 2.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Half-Life 2 actually was the first port of Half-Life 2 was on the Xbox. And people thought you couldn't do it because Half-Life 2 was so ahead of its time in terms of technology, and you needed such a hefty graphics processor in order to play it. But lo and behold, the Xbox managed to pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, and here's the bad part. I'm going to give you 3 different FPSs. and then I really liked Conquer Reloaded. Now, you can't play it online anymore, or maybe there are some people that have servers and stuff. But that control scheme and the graphics, I wish they hadn't censored some of the language, but they did add some scenes that Nintendo 64 didn't have. So bottom line is there really never has been a fully uncensored Conquer. But,
Yeah.
I mean, I love that game. It's I don't know, there's just something about it that draws me to it.
So would you say that game is worth it more for the multiplayer than for the single player?
Um,
Supposing that we could play it on the servers and we could actually play it online, etc.
No, I mean it's definitely more of it's worth more the actual single player. I mean that's really the reason to play it. But it was cool that they added a multiplayer into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are all 3 great games. I mean, Half-Life 2, you could actually get it on the Orange Box nowadays for 360, so you could play it as well there.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an interesting title to see how they tried to cram a lot of this game into a console that was not necessarily as powerful as the PCs that were meant to run this game.
And it runs it great. The physics engine in there, the protagonist being different than your normal super big badass, And I just that game is just so amazing, and it just to me, and of course we're all waiting for 3, but I know Steam.
Yeah.
I know Valve's too busy just raking in money with Steam to make 3. But
Absolutely.
I think that game doesn't get as much maybe love or look back as it should get.
Yeah, I think so. Masa, let me ask you, now that you've gotten into the Xbox, way after, its release, what would you say have been some of the experiences that you have really appreciated that you wish you had experienced back in the day?
First of all, I gotta give a shout out to a very, very weird game, or I'm not sure if it's weird, but Playboy the Mansion. I'm not sure, it might not actually be
Playboy
an
the
exclusive.
Mansion.
Yeah, Playboy the Mansion. And let me just, say this. It's basically The Sims for dudes. So if you have ever wanted to play The Sims and, you're a dude, so you might want to play that game. I believe that was the first time that I actually saw nudity in a console game.
So I guess it's a sort of a mix between The Sims and one of those tycoon games from back in the day where you actually kind of run Playboy, or is it just
Yeah,
The Sims?
it's exactly like that. Yeah, you're basically the hef in that game, and it's awesome.
Yes.
But to be a bit more serious, okay, so
Wait, you weren't being serious?
How dare you, sir?
yeah, okay, so yeah, you have Fable and Halo. Those are, of course, classics, but. Like my personal favorite game, and okay, so I'm cheating a little bit because I actually played the game on the PC, and I believe that at least Arnie talked about it before, but Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah.
Holy crap. Yeah, that's absolutely like one of my all-time favorite games, and I remember playing back in the day, and it was around the time when we, got the prequel trilogy, and I was like, yeah, what the hell is going on? Like, this game actually has a better story than any of these prequel movies. Like, what the... And
Yeah, it was the best Star Wars story we had seen in a long time.
yeah, exactly. And that game, it's still amazing, and I really wish that we would get a remake.
Yeah, either a remake or a sequel.
Yeah, but I would say like the second game, I also played it on the PC, didn't really get into it, it wasn't as good, and there were like some bugs and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say like those are probably like, one more. Yeah, Shenmue 2,
Ooh, good one.
for the longest time, until we, of course got the, remasters just last year, that was quite possibly the best, and also in many places, I believe that in Europe we never even got the the official Dreamcast version, but that was the only and also the ultimate way to play that game.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it came with Shenmue 2. It came with a DVD that gave you the story so far. It was called Shenmue the movie.
Yeah.
So you weren't totally lost. And because Shenmue 2 was not released on the Dreamcast in the US, the Xbox was really the only way to do it. So that for me, if I wanted to continue,
like if you buy that game, if you find it out in the wild, like you have to check if the movie DVD is in, because really often it's not there.
Yeah. Anything else, Masa?
I guess that's about it.
How about you, Arnie?
I mean, there's so much stuff, and even like I think Rick mentioned this before, even the stuff that's not Xbox exclusive, Xbox will usually be the best way to play a lot of them. But if I had to pick, Knights of the Old Republic for sure. And I don't know if like LucasArts had like some sort of deal with Xbox, but Star Wars games in general had a really good run. Like Republic Commando was really good. Jedi Academy was pretty solid. Obi-Wan was okay.
It was bad.
I thought it was alright. But KOTOR 1 and 2 were, sort of the pinnacles of that. Elder Scrolls Morrowind was insane and sort of the first step in, your Oblivions and your Skyrims that everybody wants to play now. Burnout was so much better on the Xbox, I think, than on PS2. And, there's just so many weird, like, if you really want to get into it, Xbox just has so many, like, weird little gems, like Stubbs the Zombie, Metal Wolf Chaos, Psychonauts.
Sneakers.
Like, Grabbed by the Ghoulies. Like, it even has, like, controversial games, like the Guy game and stuff like that.
Ooh,
which has, like, unfortunately, some underage nudity in it. But that's a whole nother story.
Well, let me just mention that I think of the Xbox as the Dreamcast 2 because so many good Sega games carried on their legacy in the Xbox, and for many games and many series, the last console release that they had was on the Xbox. So Panzer Dragoon, the last Panzer Dragoon that we saw, was on the Xbox with Orta, and it is a great game. I have my qualms with Panzer Dragoon, but at the very least, you could say that they're very beautiful games.
Which also, I was gonna ask Rick about this, because I see on your page you have like all these limited edition Xboxes that I'm always like looking at, and the only one I've ever wanted was the Panzer Dragoon Orta limited Xbox, and I think that is like the most beautiful Xbox I've ever seen.
It's so beautiful. It's completely white
with like purple detailing or something.
Lines, I'd love to tell you I have it, but I don't,
And like that, I mean, with other series like Jet Set Radio, the last one that we saw was Jet Set Radio Future on the Xbox, which, my God, I mean, that was almost 18 years ago, 17 years ago that was released. So we didn't see any more of that. Crazy Taxi, the last one we saw was Crazy Taxi 3. And then other weird releases like Gun Valkyrie, which was also a Smilebit game from the guys that made Jet Set Radio Future. I mean, that's a really weird game with a very intricate control setup, but at the very least, it's interesting. Sega GT, the last one we saw, was on the Xbox. And until recently, that now we're going to get a new release, ToeJam and Earl 3. That was the last time we saw
There's going to be a new ToeJam and
Funky
Earl?
Aliens. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
So I think it was Kickstarted or something. But that was something that the Xbox, it really felt like it was carrying on the Dreamcast legacy. And I think part of it might have been because the architecture was so similar. And, the developers could just kind of carry it over. And there was already an established relationship. Who knows? But, if you're going to play the Xbox, definitely get, some of the Dreamcast, Sega games.
And the other one is... the other one's House of the Dead 3 too, and every Halloween I haul out one of my extra Trinitrons, and it's like a 27-inch. I put it on my porch. I pull out my Xbox. I pull out House of the Dead 3, and I sit there and play it. During Halloween as I hand out candy and stuff. And half the times I get a little crowd around me, and I forget to hand out candy. But
That's awesome. That's awesome. And let me mention a few others. Splinter Cell, that's the best way to play Splinter Cell on the Xbox because it was developed for that system. So if you've only played the PS2 version back in the day, or even if you played the HD re-releases, which had a lot of issues, really the original Xbox is the way to play the Splinter Cell experience. They already mentioned Knights of the Republic, but I also want to continue with the BioWare theme and say Jet Empire. If you haven't played that game, definitely give it a go. It's more of a martial arts oriented game. It doesn't have guns, etc. But it definitely is a BioWare experience like they used to make that you don't necessarily see anymore because now you have Anthem and all this other crap that no one wants to play. And Fable. I mean, Fable was massive. I remember back in the day, Peter Molyneux, talking about, this little acorn that would grow and it would become a tree, etc. And everyone was just lapping that shit up like if it was just chocolate on Christmas. And we didn't quite get that, but it definitely was a good game. Yeah. And for a lot of people, it was their first experience with RPGs. Ninja Gaiden originally released on the Xbox and it was massive. It was brutally tough, but it was Xbox's response to Devil May Cry. And boy, was it a response, because that game was good. It was really, really damn good. So, did you guys play Ninja Gaiden back in the day?
I did, and I sucked at it. So.
I beat it one time, and I put it away, and I will never touch it again. And it's great, but it's so hard. I know I can't do it now. There's a lot of games I can't do now that I used to be able to do back then.
And just to finish it out, Forza, it got its start here. So Forza Motorsport, the first one. Definitely you can start seeing a lot of the things that would become mainstays of the later Forza games. So, you have a library editor, etc. And you have very in-depth tuning. So if you want to play that, I mean, the beautiful thing about the Xbox is that a lot of the games are still super cheap.
I was about to say, for
so not only are the consoles cheap,
for anybody who's thinking about going out collecting, Xbox is a great system. There are very few games that are, sort of insanely expensive. And usually if you're finding cross-platform games, I found that a lot of the times the Xbox version, even though it's the superior performing version, it's usually the cheaper version also. So Xbox is great for that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it really is the best way to play third-party games. So, for example, if you want to play Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, definitely play it on the Xbox. That's the way to go. So usually, as a rule of thumb, everything was better on the Xbox compared to the PS2.
Yeah.
There's some games I've picked when you were saying they're cheaper. There's some games I've picked up at video game conventions and stuff. And it's funny because if you look at the price listings, sometimes they're pretty close. But I had a vendor one time look at me and I said, hey, I'm looking for Futurama and I was looking for the Jurassic Park game, which are both kind of pricey for the Xbox. And he's like, oh yeah, I got the PS2 stuff right here. And he had that under glass. And the Xbox stuff he just had tossed over there. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I go, well, I want the Xbox. And he goes, yeah, but I have PS2. And he just couldn't believe I wanted the Xbox stuff. And he just gave it to me for half of what it normally goes for. And I walked away just thrilled.
Of course.
Yeah, and you can get some really good deals.
I don't know why, retail-wise, retailers just don't seem to value their Xbox stock as much as their PS2 stock. And I don't get it because there's just as many PS2 games out there. In terms of volume, it's not like you're sort of have this sort of excess of Xbox games that you don't have on PS2. The PS2 library was massive. So I don't understand why PS2 games are valued so highly over Xbox, aside from the fact that more people play PS2s.
And especially GameCube games. But yeah, I mean, of course, there's the whole Nintendo tax, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Nintenflation.
Yeah, exactly.
But with the GameCube, I get it a little bit more because I could see that version of the game just being a little harder to find in general because it didn't sell as well. But the Xbox version, you'd think there'd be less of them out there, but they're usually cheaper than the PS2 version. It's weird. I don't get it.
No, I have to say that, okay, so my Xbox collection as a whole is not that big. But I think there's only one game that I've ever spent more than 20 euros on, and that was actually Shenmue 2, which I think I paid maybe 30 euros for it. But everything else, the OG games, 360, all these games I have gotten for 5 to 10 euros and so on, and even some harder to find and some really decent titles too. Yeah. So yeah, it's not just the OG Xbox, but even the Xbox 360. like if you're just getting into collecting, that's definitely like something that you should probably like consider collecting for, because yeah, you can get quite a massive number of games for very, you don't have to pay. Like, let's say you buy a first-party Nintendo game, might be $40 to $50, and for the same price, you will get like 10 Xbox games.
Yeah,
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
They're at
Also,
Goodwill.
if you happen to find Drake of the 99 Dragons, definitely pick that up.
You are a son of a bitch. Yeah.
That and what's the Bruce Lee game that's apparently like
Enter the Dragon or
Yeah.
something,
Yes.
or yeah, there are some clunkers on the Xbox, but not that many. But even the clunkers, there's something to be said about them. And talking about clunkers, this is neither a clunker nor a great game, but I love it. And that's Tao Feng, Fist of the Lotus. And this was developed by John Tobias, who was one of the original developers of Mortal Kombat. And I just think it's a massively fun fighter. So you can actually break bones, etc. So basically, they were doing what Ed Boon did many years later with Mortal Kombat and Breaking Bones, etc.
Yeah.
So it's a very cheap game, actually. It goes for very cheap nowadays, but it's gonna be a fun experience if you play it with a friend. So definitely make sure to check that out. Let's kind of round this out a little bit, because as we know, the Xbox did not do well. I mean, you could say that it was a failure, but it still had so many things that it did right that calling it a failure feels like a slap to the face. But it did not perform well. I mean, it only sold 24 million units, which is not that great.
Good enough for
particularly when
second.
compared to the PS.
Got that silver medal.
But
Yeah, I mean, it did
it
get
did beat the
second.
GameCube.
Yes.
It did beat the GameCube, but when you consider that the PS2 sold like 120 million units, that's massive. That's absolutely massive. But you can't understate how badly it did in Japan. It only sold 450,000 units in Japan. I mean, that is absolutely terrible. And, I think the big problem with it was that it was just too big. It was really offensive to the Japanese. It was like, you're going to make us buy this thing and when we don't even have enough space. So I think it was offensive to them. So what do you guys think? What do you think was the main reason for the Xbox failing to gain traction either in Japan or as a console itself?
I think Japan, like you said, it was huge, and they actually there's a TV show somewhere in Japan where they took the Xbox there, they had the Duke, and they were showing the Japanese announcer, hey, look, you can put it on your leg, like you can put it on your leg. So he put it on his leg. Well, his leg's smaller than this giant American dude that showed up, and it just fell onto the floor. And he looked at it and he goes, it doesn't fit on my leg. So, I mean, it just was destined to fail in Japan. It was huge. And like we already said, the launch lineup was not very Japanese friendly, you know?
And it didn't have RPGs. You could actually say that was a big reason why the Xbox failed.
I mean,
The PS2 had Final Fantasy and other
Yeah.
RPGs.
Yeah,
not
and
even
mean,
that
if
it-
you think
had
about
Knights of the
Xbox
Old
One,
Republic.
like the same thing has happened to Xbox One, and Xbox One has done even worse in Japan. Like, it's been out for a few years, and it has barely sold 100,000 copies, and it's literally been sold as an HD Blu-ray player. So, and the biggest reason is that it doesn't have no Japanese exclusives. At least Xbox 360, which went on to sell, I believe it was like 1.5 million units in Japan, which is very good for, an American console. But at least, there was lots of exclusive games, like Japanese exclusives on the Xbox 360.
yeah.
Which brings up the question as to whether you can actually succeed in the console arena without succeeding in Japan. I mean, the 360 didn't do great, but it did much better than the One and the original Xbox did.
Isn't that an insane question though? It in looking at it from a numbers perspective, like the population of the country of Japan is what? 20 million people?
No, it's like 130
Yeah,
million.
it's 130 million people.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you're talking about like your video game market, obviously Japan's it's a huge market, don't get me wrong, but like you come back here to the West, there's 250 million people just in America. So it's weird to me how the numbers work out where like the fact that you think that you need to be strong in Japan when there's such a much larger market outside of it is weird to me. Like I understand.
I think it's not about the market though. The problem is that a console lives and dies by its software. And when you don't have Japanese software developers working on your console, you really are cutting yourself short in the eyes of gamers because your library is so limited by that empty space.
Yeah, I could see that.
And I think it's not necessarily about the fact that there are people buying this console in the country, because that's not necessarily the case. I mean, even with the PS4, we have seen that in Japan now there is just a huge movement towards mobile gaming and a move away from console gaming. Yeah. But it's really about the Japanese experiences that the console provides. Until Russia becomes like a major player in console development and software development, and other countries kind of catch up, which they're getting there. I think that Japan is just big because that's where the developers are.
That's true.
So
I think that what I was going to say is I don't think the lack of RPGs necessarily hurt the Xbox, but if you're talking about strictly in terms of Japan, I think that even if they'd had more RPGs, I don't think that it necessarily would have mattered, because they would have been Western RPGs. I think what they needed was Japanese RPGs. Like you said, they didn't have a Final Fantasy. They tried.
So Deki was like a Western developed JRPG, and that was kind of like what they were hanging their hat on. But it wasn't a substitute for a Square Enix game. I mean,
even with the 360, they tried Lost Odyssey, which was a Square Enix game, I believe, and Blue Dragon, and it just didn't take. It was. So I think to a certain extent, I think it is tied to the console. I think that they recognize that Microsoft just isn't going to be the thing that's going to cater to them, because I think their focus is sort of outside of Japan.
And it seems to me too, and maybe I'm wrong, but when the 360 first came out, I mean, they definitely courted Japan. I mean, they courted, they really pushed hard.
They tried, yeah.
And if you look at, but now watch the life cycle of 360. Towards the end, I think they just said, look, we're done. We're fine with, more Western audience. Mm-hmm. There's a huge demographic there, and they're just kind of done really trying to push Japan. We'll try to sell there, but I don't know. That's how it seemed to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think right now what they're realizing is that I don't think that we're going to be able to make it there. Be it for whatever reasons, because of nationalism, etc., and this could be a reason. It could be a reason.
I mean, it definitely
we're not going to support American consoles. We're going to support the team, the home player, the home team. And I think that's why you see Phil Spencer kind of, just completely going into buying their own studio houses that are not necessarily Japanese, but just making sure that they just have software and they just have exclusives without necessarily thinking about how is this going to play in Japan.
Yeah, and I think to answer your question, I think you can succeed, because I think the Xbox 360 did it.
Oh,
I think it. I don't ever think you're going to be the number one console without a foothold in Japan, clearly. But I think if the question is just, can you have a successful console without having a successful install base in Japan, then I think the answer is yes, because I think the 360 did it and showed that it can be done.
Yeah. Well, but, beyond that, I mean, it was hemorrhaging money, etc. I mean, I think that Microsoft lost about $4 billion on the Xbox, but we do have to take a look at the Xbox from a more, subjective. We have to kind of grade it on a curve, because it did so well in many other aspects, and it was such a revolutionary console with respect to so many things. Like we said, the hard drives and online capability, that is the norm nowadays. The movement towards a PC-driven ecosystem, the fact that they're more concerned about what developers need rather than what Ken Kuraragi thinks they need.
Yeah.
That is big. And so at the end of the day, I mean, it was discontinued in 2005, but at the same time, it burned so bright for a particular point in time. And it's almost as if the original Xbox had to die in order for something else to blossom. And that was the 360. And I think that it did so many things well that we have to look back at it with a positive point of view.
Yeah.
It was actually a success in many ways, because so much of what it did became a mainstay of the game console experience.
It laid the foundation. I mean, I don't work for Microsoft. I have no idea what their thought process was, but it seems to me a lot of the stuff I've read and seen is that they knew they were going to lose money, maybe not overall, but they just wanted to get that brand recognition out there. They wanted to get a foothold into the door and just kind of set up that base for, future consoles. And I think in that aspect, I think they did a really good job.
Yeah, they did. What do you think, Masa?
I think it was necessary. Okay, sure, it wasn't a big success, but I think it did enough, and Microsoft was able to establish a lot of the mainstay franchises such as Forza and Halo. So yeah, I think it really paved the way for Xbox 360's massive success.
Awesome. So before we close out, Rick, I want you to tell us a little bit more about the modding scene on Xbox, because you're big on modding Xboxes. So, for us laymen, please tell us and convert us into Xbox modders.
All right. And the thing is, to be honest, we could do an entire episode on just modding, especially the Xbox. So I will, for those who do mod, yes, I'm going to very, very basically. So the nice part about the Xbox is, and we already talked about the PC architecture, is that soft modding for it is super easy. If you have a memory card and you have a certain file and you have a copy of Splinter Cell and there's a couple other games you can use that have a Linux base, you just throw it in there, you can soft mod it, and there's people that just go ahead and transfer data into the hard drive that it comes with, and you can have a whole bunch of old arcade stuff. So that's real easy. The other thing would be chips, and like you said, sometimes you can pick up Xboxes that have chips in them, and you can still buy chips for them. As a matter of fact, people still make mod chips for those.
Are Xboxes natively region free?
No.
Okay.
No, because you can't. Yeah, you can't play Japanese stuff. You can't do PAL, but if you mod it, you can.
Yeah.
And of course, it also bypasses that whole thing for needing a remote to play DVDs, which is nice about modding. So a lot of people do the soft mod thing. There's something called a TSOP. I don't want to get into all of it. You're basically soldering a few points depending on which model you have. And at that point, now your hard drives, once you unlock them, they're just plug and play. So the nice part about that is you're not sending a bunch of information from the PC into your Xbox. You can just kind of make one good drive, clone it. And it also is a little bit safer. So if a hard drive dies, your Xbox isn't dead. And then so the chips, the TSOPs, and it's really easy. And the stuff that the guys are doing with them now, I know I mentioned the slims. The guys change out the DVD drive and they kind of slim it down. Some of them are really sleek. And there's some guys that are right now are figuring out how to do a super slim. These things it's amazing how thin they can actually get them by taking the heat sinks off and putting those little low profile fans on. And I have. You guys have seen mine. I throw the bling all in them and put LEDs in the controller ports and cut a hole in the lid and have a ring shine out.
That's awesome.
That's part of the Xbox thing, right? I mean, it's a monstrosity. It's this big, giant, lovable thing, and I just kind of I like making it gaudy,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's
I've seen some beautiful ones too.
Yeah, I think. Honestly, I think that's what gives the original Xbox, really long legs in terms of, console usability. I think that, when you see things like the PS3 and the PS4, it sort of has moved people away from the PS2, but I see so many people coming back to the original Xbox to do stuff like that, because it's nice to have a console that you can hook up to your TV, no mess, no fuss, just have all these emulators on it, like you said, really easy to mod, to be able to do all that stuff.
And it is a great, I'm telling you, it is a great emulation machine, and the modding community for the Xbox is still going strong. Just last year, there was a brand new soft mod that came out for it, brand new Hexen disc.
Wow.
We're already kind of changing the BIOS. They're up to 2 terabytes. Nobody can seem to crack that. I'm sure there's a reason. I don't understand why. But for instance, my Xbox has it's a 3 terabyte drive, so that you can actually get the full 2 terabytes out of it. I have what's called a Limeberry drive. I used to make my own, but there's somebody who's just, when you boot this thing up, it looks like Windows 10. And
That's awesome.
It just, I'm going to have to show you guys videos, because what this guy has done is simply amazing. And
for sure.
Yeah, so there's just so much you can do with them. They're just wonderful.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Rick, just closing out, from your consoles, we already talked about the Panzer Dragoon limited edition console, but from the ones that you have, what is your favorite limited edition console?
It's got to be my Mountain Dew one.
I knew it.
Yeah, it's definitely my Mountain Dew. You can see that thing from a mile away, and I have.
Yeah, I think we all saw that coming.
Yeah, and I have LEDs in the the shelving unit I have in a closet
Yeah.
where I kind of took the doors off. And when I do kind of more of the blacklight thing, that thing just, I mean, it's like a beacon in my room.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember that competition. Like, I actively remember when that was going on. And I thought that was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Like, I thought that thing looked hideous. But now, looking back on it, like, seeing pictures of it, I'm like, oh, this thing looks pretty neat, actually.
I think it was 1,000 bottle caps, and then you still had
It
to buy it.
It was so, you'd have to sink so much money into just buying Mountain Dew products.
And it built that foundation of Xbox being associated with Mountain Dew on Doritos.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
But now
let's-
Taco Bell has sort of taken up that torch and done their whole, you know, you can get your
I actually-
gold-plated PS4 and whatever.
I actually have the Taco Bell Xbox One that they were giving out.
Oh, do you?
Yes, I actually do. My friend got it. He won the competition, and then he sold it to me. So there you go. Okay, so I think that about covers it. I think we've talked about the Xbox quite a bit, and if nothing, I think that I'm going to go out to see if I can find some deals on some Xbox games. And if you're out and about, make sure to be on the lookout for some Xbox experiences, because it really is a nifty little console.
Yeah.
Well, it's not little. It's very, very big. But Rick, where can we find you, man?
So I'm over at Ashaven Instagram, and that's pretty much it.
Arnie, what's up?
For me, you can just find me on Instagram at Region Free Gamers. We also have a Twitter and a YouTube at Region Free Gamers on those. Just come on up, let's chat, let's do it up.
And Masa.
So you can find me on Instagram, and my handle is MasaJarvinen09.
And my name is Ozzy, and you can find me on at Shadow the Collector with periods in between those words. I'm usually not as active as I used to be, but you can always go on the Region Free Gamers Instagram, and we're always there. But, you know, before we close out, I just want to give a big thanks to Rick for joining us. This was a really fun one, and, you know, it's really good to have people with the passion that Rick has for the Xbox. So thank you so much for joining us, man.
Of course, dude. Yeah.
It was a dream come true.
I am not.
All right,
fighting
guys.
you
So that's it for us. And until next time, stay tight and play some Xbox.
Peace.
Peace out.
Ooh.